In a moment, I'm going to read the names of the new members of the Synod. Please would they stand in their places when I mention their names and remain standing so that we can greet them all with applause at the end. The new members are the Right Reverend V4 Bishop of Bristol, replacing Right Reverend Mike Hill, the Right Reverend Dame Sarah Mullally, Bishop of London, replacing the Right Reverend Dr. Richard Charters, the Reverend Mark Merthen, London, replacing the Reverend Bartford Olivier, the Reverend John Henry Curran, Southall and Nottingham, replacing the Reverend Chris Hodder, the Reverend Canon Dr. Rachel Mann, Manchester, replacing the Reverend Mike McGurk, the Reverend Martin Goff, Armed Forces Synod, replacing the Venerable Ian Wheatley, Mr. Simon Friend, Exeter, replacing Dr. Sam Robinson, and Dr. Eve Poole, Third Estates Commissioner, ex officio, replacing Mr. Andrew McKee. May we please greet them all. And I would like to welcome two guests from member churches of the Anglican Communion who are attending Synod as invited speakers. They are as follows: the Most Reverend Humphrey Peters, Bishop of Peshawar and Moderator and Primate of the Church of Pakistan, the Most Reverend Albert Chama, Archbishop of Central Africa and Bishop of Northern Zambia. We will also be joined tomorrow by the Most Reverend Moon Hing, Archbishop and Primate of the Church of the Province of Southeast Asia and Bishop of West Malaysia, Archbishop Winston Halapua, Bishop of Pelonesia and Archbishop and Primate of the Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia, was invited to speak to us today, but unfortunately he needed to turn back. He traveled as far as Auckland but had to go back because of very serious ill health. We pray for him for speed recovery, and we trust that the Lord will continue healing him. So please join me in welcoming our Anglican Communion guests. This concludes this item of business. We now move to item 2, where we have a chance to hear from our Anglican Communion guests. Will you please come to the platform, both of you? I now invite the Most Reverend Humphrey Peters, Bishop of Peshawar, Moderator of the Church of Pakistan, to address, and will be followed by the Most Reverend Archbishop Albert Chama of the Church of the Province of Central Africa.
I address Archbishop Johnson Tama, address Archbishop Justin Welby, for the members of the Synod. It's a joy, it's a blessing to be with you once again. Last Synod I was here, and again it's an encouragement that we have been invited. Greetings from the Church of Pakistan. For those who don't know much about the Church of Pakistan, Church of Pakistan is a union of Anglicans, Lutherans, Methodists, and the Scottish Presbyterians. So we celebrate this unity, and we are very happy that only in Pakistan, that in the world, only in Pakistan the Lutherans could join. And we really cherish this friendship with them. Pakistan was created in 1947. At that time, there were about 60 million Pakistanis between two parts. That was the West Pakistan and East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. 60 million, and out of 60 million, there were 15% Christians. Now we have got just one part, because now we have got the other part has become East Bangladesh, and we have got 200 million people in Pakistan right now. And the Christians have gone down to 3% only, which is not a good sign. It's an alarming situation. And there's a constant struggle of the church for its existence, its survival, and its identity. And the most dangerous thing is this. Al-Qaeda was there. It was made in 1980 in Peshawar, in my city. And Osama was there. And then the Malala comes from that area, Malala Yousafzai. Malala's father is very well known to our local priest. Even he is known to me personally. And but the most disturbing thing is that ISIS and Daesh, they have made their headquarters in Afghanistan, next to Pakistan, very close. Only one of our parishes is just 7 miles from Afghanistan. And they have started their activities. I wasn't allowed this Easter to go for the sunrise procession. The security people told me that, Bishop, if you go out, we are going to pick you and bring you back, because there's a problem for target killing. And what happens? Easter Monday, they killed the Daesh. They killed 4 Christians. It was a target killing. And within 2 weeks, there were 2 more, they were killed. So situation is not very good, and it is disturbing as well. But this real hatred started, and this thing started within Pakistan with the influx of Afghan refugees in 1979. Because the Afghan refugees brought in the extremism, fundamentalism, and so many other things. And you know, they were heavily supported by our friends and dear ones from the West. But this thing really improved, and with the passage of time, the Pakistanis got this idea of extremism, fundamentalism, terrorism, and everything, whatever you call it, and it is there. And if you look at the total environment for the religious minorities in Pakistan, the total environment, look at the legislation, look at the politics, look at the education, look at the social, economic side, everything is not very, very supportive. There's a biased material in education. And the most disturbing factor was recently we are having our elections on the 25th of July. And we cannot elect our people. The minorities cannot elect their own people. They are selected by the winning majority political parties. Very complicated system. So we don't have our direct voice that could really curb the legislation which is made, the rules which are made in the, and in the this year, except for one political party, except for one, there are so many, no party has given priority to the Christians, which is again alarming for us. Target killing, no political say, problem, biased education. And all these things are there, which is creating a lot of problem for the church, for its existence and for its survival. And the reason for my coming over here and accepting this invitation was this. Look at Iraq. Look at Syria. Look at Palestine. The church has fast diminished in those areas in that Islamic context. Now, the waves are coming towards Pakistan as well. But still, there's a time. Still, there's a little bit of hope. And before we discuss about hope, I think I would like to show you a small little video, and then we'll proceed ahead. How can we do things better? Can we have video number 1, please?
The right to believe is a fundamental human right. Yet around the world, millions of Christians are denied this freedom. Worse, they are actively persecuted because of their faith. And here are the top 5 countries on the list. The most dangerous places in the world to be a Christian. Number 5. Pakistan. Christians in Pakistan are facing unprecedented levels of violence. At least 160 Christian buildings were attacked in 2017. Over 700 Christian women and girls were forcibly married. Convert to Christianity from Islam and you bring shame upon your family. Speak up for your faith and you run the risk of being imprisoned for blasphemy. For most Christians in Pakistan, life is lived on the margins, ostracized, denied education, and restricted to the dirtiest, least regarded occupations.
This is the condition, this is the situation in which a church is trying to survive, church is trying to exist, and church is trying to maintain its identity. And in this situation, we were thinking that what to do, how to do. We got very good institution from the old Raj time. But it's very difficult to maintain those educational institutions and health institutions because there's hardly any support for us. Even from the local government, where are the funds for the minorities, it's very difficult to acquire the funds for its development. So our existence, survival is really a challenge. But despite that, in our very humble capacity, we thought that we should do something for the reconciliation with the majority Muslim community. And some of them responded to it very nicely. And this is a little ray of hope. In a very small way, what we did was that we started interfaith activities to reduce the this is a lot of intolerance, to reduce the intolerance and also to promote the peaceful coexistence and harmony. We tried it out, but in a very, very small way, but it worked very well. Well, I would like you to see our humble efforts in that regard. Can we have video number 2, please?
Peace
Well, this is our humble efforts to maintain the existence and the survival and the identity of the church in the Islamic context. We are a little bit successful in it, and we celebrate that success. And we really want that the global church, one body of Christ, 1 Corinthians 12 to end, leading on to 1 Corinthians 13 chapter, we should be looking into it very carefully, that how the weaker parts of the body are struggling for their survival. Do we want to see Pakistan becoming another Iraq, another Syria, another Palestine? Or do we want to see that Pakistan should grow and to become a source of blessing, source of joy, not only for Christians, for the Muslim community as well? They also need us. So it's a humble struggle. And one of the biggest achievement, I'm going to share it with you, the chief of the Islamic Party, Jamaat-e-Islami, just see to it that we started this Faith Friends in 2004, and after our long struggle, just see to him, what does he say about the minority? This is how we managed to make inroads. You saw in the video, you saw people sitting with their round caps, white caps. These are all the students from the religious schools. Some of them are turned into Taliban later on, but government is trying to control it. So we have managed to make inroads, and we have managed it, we have achieved a little bit. And look at this, I'm just going to show you the video, biggest achievement about this, that after a long struggle, so many years, the chief of the Islamic Party, they have got influence right from Karachi, from the sea to the mountain to my area. It's more than 1,000 miles. So just can we have the video number 3, please? This is
तो बहुत सारे लोग ऐसे थे जिन्होंने पेशावर, लाहौर और कराची और क्वेटा छोड़कर इंडिया का रास्ता लिया, लेकिन ये वही लोग हैं जिन्होंने इंडिया जाने की बजाय पाकिस्तान की सरजमीन को अपनाया और यहाँ रहना, यहाँ मरना गवारा किया। यहाँ की तरक्की में, यहाँ के मजबूरी माहौल में इनके बहुत बड़ा कंट्रीब्यूशन है। मैंने इसलिए कहा कि ये पाकिस्तानी बिरादरी को कहा जाए।
These are some of our humble efforts to maintain the existence, survival, and identity of the church in hostile environment. We need your support. May God bless you all. Thank you very much.
I think it is right and proper before Archbishop Albert Chama speaks for us to stand as a sign of solidarity and spend a moment of stillness praying for the people of Pakistan. Lord, hear us. Thank you.
Your Grace Archbishop Sentamo, Your Grace Archbishop Justin, and all members of this synod, I bring greetings to you from the Church of the Province of Central Africa. To some of you might not know the province of Central Africa. Politically, on the African continent, we are not really centered in Central Africa, in the center of Africa. We are mostly in the southern part of Africa. But in the Anglican geography, we are in the province of Central Africa. Our province is a composition of 4 countries: Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. We are a transnational, and of course I work there as a diocesan bishop in Zambia, in the diocese called Northern Zambia, and also I do work in the other countries as Archbishop. In our case, we do engage in various ways in terms of ministry and missions. From ACC 16, where the resolve of intentional discipleship was resolved, we did take that on board seriously, and of course was taken to our synod, provincial synod, as well as individual diocesan synods, and we are taking intentional discipleship as a serious ministry in our different jurisdictions where we exist as Anglicans. We also do a lot of community work, working with people who are deprived or underprivileged in various ways. We also now have taken seriously the issues of engaging our governments on matters affecting our citizenry in various ways or on various issues, which at times are very, very critical, where we need to work and live together in harmony within our national states. Of course, Zimbabwe is our concern. You might have seen in the media that there was an attempt of assassination on the president and his vice and other government officials when they had gone to Bulawayo for campaigns. Since they are planning to go to the polls very soon, our concern as a province is that the polls be peaceful, fair, and free. And secondly, we are very hopeful that with the change of leadership in Zimbabwe, things would change, that the country would be rebuilt in terms of economy, which has been shattered for many years. So we ask that you pray for Zimbabwe, or you join us to pray for Zimbabwe as they plan to go to the polls. It's a very, very serious matter. I'm always constantly in touch with the bishops in Zimbabwe. And also, we have taken on board seriously the financial sustainability of the church within our province, where we are encouraging one another as bishops and our faithful Christians that we take certain things on board to see how best we can sustain our churches financially, which would enable us to continue with the mission and ministries within where we are. And of course, this has been taken on board by us as Central Africa, but other provinces of the continent has also taken it on board, and we are sharing and comparing notes that as we go in the next 10 years, we pray that things would change. That is not all that we do. Since I wear two hats as well as a chairperson of CAPA. CAPA, to some of you who might not know what it is a council of provinces on the continent of Africa, together with one diocese, that is Egypt. They are part of that. It's where we meet with a common mind to see how best we can tackle common problems which affect our people on the continent of Africa. We are so much engaged into reconciliation missions and ministry, of course in collaboration with Lambeth Palace, to see to it that the problems of South Sudan are resolved by accompanying them on their journey, in their quest for peace, through our Episcopal Church in South Sudan, as well as the Council of Churches in South Sudan, in the spirit of ecumenism. So we have taken that on board seriously, and we are supporting our friends. On the whole, we do ask this synod, as you also continue to deliberate issues which mainly might be of peculiar to your situation or to your province, you also remember us in your prayers as we continue to see how best can we continue to work in the propagation of the gospel as a province of Central Africa, as well as a continent of Africa, especially where there are so many problems, especially economic problems and political problems. So we ask you that remember us in all that you do. Don't only concentrate within house, but think of us who are outside your house, that we should also be involved in what you're doing, especially through prayer and counsel where necessary. With these few words, I wish you all God's blessings in your deliberations on various issues. God bless you.
Again, it won't be just the clapping, but the commitment to pray for the province of Central Africa. So we stand to show our solidarity. I would like to thank the primates again for their messages to us, and this concludes this item of business. We now move to item 3. In addition to our 9 representatives of other churches who are with us at each group of sessions, we always have some additional Anglican and ecumenical guests at the July group of sessions. Unlike the 9 representatives, they usually attend on one occasion and do not have speaking rights. So I'm going to ask them to stand and invite you to greet each one of them in turn when I introduce them. And in this occasion, first of all, we want to welcome Bishop Ralph Meister. He is the Lance Bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Hanover, which is one of the largest Landeskirche of the Evangelical Church in Germany. Previously, he served as the General Superintendent or Regional Bishop of Berlin. He has also worked in the Department of Practical Theology at the University of Hamburg and has been a long-standing contributor to religious broadcasting on German radio. He is the co-chair of the Meissen Commission, which is responsible for developing the commitment between the Church of England and the Evangelical Church of Germany under the Meissen Agreement. May we please greet him. I always love his title. He's the Bishop of the Land, which means every part, wherever there is land. Reverend Tauno Tenda. Reverend Tauno Tenda has been advisor for the international and ecumenical relations of the Church Council of the Estonian Evangelical Lutheran Church since 2015. Following ordination, he served as a parish priest before becoming General Secretary of the National Council of Churches between 2004 and 2011, after which he turned to parish ministry. He has been a lecturer in systematic theology. He is a former member of the Liturgical Commission and Theological Commission of the Church, and is now in the Commission of Legislation a member of the General Synod. He has been a member of the Porvoo Contact Group since 2009. May we please greet him. Thank you very much. The Venerable Paul Magnus. The Venerable Paul Magnus is Archdeacon of St. David's and Domestic Chaplain and Clerical Secretary of the Bishop of St. David's. He has served in all of his ministry in the Diocese of St. David's in the Church in Wales. He's a trustee of the representative body of the Church in Wales and has also served in the governing body of the Church in Wales, serving as a member of the implementation panel that looked at the review of the Church in Wales carried out by Lord Harris. He serves as the governing body worship coordinator and the ecumenical secretary to the Diocesan Conference, Nomination Board, and DBF HR Committee. Some of you who had the Nicaean dinner last night heard him speak. May we please greet him. I now invite Bishop Ralph Meister to come to the platform to greet the Synod on behalf of the ecumenical guests.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Synod of the Church of England, dear brothers and sisters in Christ. It's a great honor for me to attend the General Synod of the Church of England and to convey to you today the cordial greetings in the name of the Ecumenical and other guests and of the Evangelical Church of Germany. I bring to you the greetings of the Council of the EKD, the Chairman of the Council, Bishop Professor Heinrich Bedford Strom, the greetings of the Presidium of the Synod, and personally from the Chair of the Presidium, Mr. Schwetzer. It's a great pleasure for me to visit you again. I want to express as the co-chair the relevant and fruitful relationship in our Meissen commitment. And in the name of the EKD, I say we are and we will be strong partners of the Church of England. We live in unpredictable times in national life, in Europe and worldwide. It is easy to list crises that affect the world. Migration crisis, climate crisis, Brexit crisis. We are in time of uncertainty. A few years ago, if you had asked a politician for a vision of the future, they would probably have spoken of a future of unity, particularly within Europe. However, the language of unity has to some extent been replaced by populism and nationalism, by separation rather than reunion. But we as Christians have to oppose these tendencies. We don't count our lives in calendars of separation. We're not only living in the third year after the Brexit referendum, we are living to bridge the gap between our churches. We're not only living in years of uncertainty and unpredictability, we are saved by hope, like we read in St. Paul in the letter to the Romans. No hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. We do hope, constantly, deeply, and with patience. The messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, indeed, he is coming. So we read in the prophet Malachi. We have to manage these days. But we have another vision, since we have another promise. We are empowered by God, and we are liberated by his grace. Albert Einstein said, there are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. As Christians, we approach life in the second way. Our attitudes are not bound by the limits of the world, but set free by the wonder and presence of God. The major poets of the 20th century, T.S. Eliot, once asked, where's the life we have lost in living? Where's the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we have lost in information? The cycles of heaven in 20th century bring us farther from God and nearer to dust. Giving up is not an option. Resignation is no Christian option. My generation started 40 years ago in a church which was strong, established, and broadly accepted a religious institution. These days are gone, all in Europe. Society is now more plural and fragmented, but the church is about more than statistics. Our mission follows that of one man, Jesus Christ. On Easter Day, he walked and talked with just 2 disciples on the way to Emmaus. We walk that journey with him, and we follow his command to go and make disciples of all nations. The Church of England and the Protestant churches in the EKD, and all the churches representing by the ecumenical guests, we are side by side on the path to Emmaus with burning hearts, while he, our Lord, talks with us on the way. Martin Luther once wrote, it is not up to us to maintain the church, and it was neither the role of our ancestors nor the work of our successors, but it was him, our Lord. And he will maintain the church when he says, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world. God bless your synod and your work for the kingdom of God. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Lance Bishop Ralph Meister for his address, and that concludes this item of business.
Good afternoon, Synod. Excuse me, I haven't got my jacket on, but neither of you, mostly. We move to item 4 on the agenda, the report by the Business Committee, for which you'll need GS 2091. And I invite the mover of the motion, Canon Sue Boyes, the Chair of the Business Committee, to present her report, and so you have up to 10 minutes to do so.
Boys, Oxford 186. Thank you. Friends, it's good to be back in York for the longest synod of the quinquennium so far, and possibly the hottest. This is one of the widest ranging agendas this synod has considered in recent years, covering everything from the ethics of nuclear weapons, the state of the environment and the NHS, the future of our cathedrals, and a presentation and debate on safeguarding, including a welcome opportunity to hear from survivors. I want to begin by addressing what was undoubtedly the committee's most difficult decision, and one which I'm aware is controversial, namely the decision not to schedule for debate Mr. Archer's and Mr. Shaw's motions, nor the Hereford diocesan motion. We were fortunate to have the opportunity at our residential meeting to take unhurried time for an initial consideration of all these issues before our final agenda-setting meeting in May. We heard from Dr. Ava John, the enabling officer for the evolving document on marriage and the Pastoral Advisory Group, about the work of the different groups of people involved in this process. The document is very much a work in progress, with an emphasis on teaching and learning together. Members of the committee had been in touch or had conversations with a number of people at or prior to the February group of sessions, and others of you had written and spoken to us between that synod and our meeting. Nevertheless, the committee was persuaded that Dr. John's approach, the timescale and the commitment to engage regularly with this synod offered the best way forward and the best use of the synod's time. We would like the synod to know that this decision was unanimous. Following the successful presentations on Saturday afternoon last July, we were committed to the idea of including within our time together a similar conference-style pause in our formal work. During this time, you will have opportunities to engage directly with those working on the teaching document, with the Pastoral Advisory Group, and in some of our national initiatives. Our expectation is that, having participated to the full, you will share the Business Committee's belief that this approach presents an opportunity not only to hear about, but to influence these aspects of the Church's work outside our normal, sometimes adversarial context. I look forward to introducing this work at lunchtime tomorrow. A first for this agenda is the work that the Business Committee has done to bring together 3 diocesan synod motions and a motion from the national investment bodies into 2 debates. We are grateful to all those concerned for their willingness to work with us on this, and to Joyce Jones and Clive Scowen from the Business Committee for their leadership of this work. Now for some practical matters. I need to apologise for the slight slippage of timing in the emails sent to members to alert them to the publication of the questions and answers paper. Although the papers were online at the right time, the notice arrived with you a little late. My profound apologies. This is the second year that York Synod Days are structured in the same way as those in London, concluding with worship at 7 and leaving the evenings free for food, fellowship and football. Please note that within the agenda, the timings on Friday afternoon and Monday morning have inadvertently reverted to the old schedule. For the avoidance of doubt, we end at 7 on Friday and break for lunch at 1 on Monday. Given that the afternoons are quite long, I understand that the chairs will be adjourning Synod for a brief comfort break during afternoons. A bell will be rung 1 minute before the end of those breaks, and I urge you to make every possible effort to return promptly. We hope that in this broad agenda, everyone who wishes will be able to find something to enthuse them. If you haven't made your maiden speech or haven't spoken often before, please seek this opportunity. I know that the chairs would welcome this. Please help them in their conduct of debates by standing clearly in your place and by putting in requests to speak early. Speaking of speaking, may I ask you to refresh your understanding of the Business Committee's Code of Conduct, and in particular, the section on declaration of interests. You are requested to declare any interest of your own or a close family member which could result in a conflict of loyalty or which could affect another member's ability to form a balanced judgment of your arguments. Relevant interests, financial or non-financial, should be declared at the beginning of any speech or intervention. I would also like, as usual, to draw your attention to the notice paper that details security arrangements and, as ever, urge your vigilance. Our staff continue to look at improvements to the accessibility of Synod meetings for members, guests, staff and visitors. In the February group of sessions, a consultant will help carry out an accessibility audit. In the meantime, please approach the staff at the information desk with both requests and feedback. We will be introducing a feedback survey following this group of sessions, seeking your views on a wide range of issues. A link to the survey will be circulated, and I would encourage you to complete and return it so you can help us to improve Synod for you. Another item for completion is, guess what? The GDPR form. This will help us to have a complete list of members for all kinds of circulations. You may place your completed form in the box at the information desk. Now to the national game. Following this item of business, a notice paper will be available which has revised timings for tomorrow afternoon. We have enabled those who wish to watch the match to miss only the second seminar slot, and no seminars are cancelled. Not everybody wants to watch the football, I understand. We have taken this action specifically to enable as many people as possible to attend the seminars and to watch the football. And to further enable this, I am delighted to tell you that the football will be screened here. And to thank the staff and the university who have arranged this. More good news. After such a busy synod, I'm sure you will be relieved to learn that the presidents have agreed that the November contingency dates will not be used. There will be a formal confirmation of this when the group of session ends. I want to offer particular thanks, as always, to our talented and dedicated staff who have been here in advance of us and will leave after us, working extremely hard to enable our work together. When we next meet in 2019, it will be the centenary year of the legislation which established the Church Assembly, the predecessor body to the General Synod. So as Synod gets into its 100th year, I commit us all to the work of God's kingdom and pray with you for the guidance of God's Spirit. I beg to move the motion standing in my name.
Thank you. This motion is now open for debate. Can I just remind you before you get standing up that your speeches need to be about the agenda and not the speech you would have made had the agenda been different. If you start on that, I'll have to stop you in a very nice way, but we need to be clear about that. So I'll be calling two people at a time, and there will be a 3-minute speech limit from the beginning. Charles Reed. Followed by Jane Ozanne.
Thank you. Charles Reed, 181 Norwich. I just want to offer a brief comment on section 46 of the report, which refers to the timings, and a comment on the Saturday, inclusion of Saturday in our meeting in February. Over the time that I've been a member of this synod, I've always tried to invite guests to come and observe what we do, usually colleagues and students from TEIs where I've been teaching, but occasionally other people from my diocese. In February, I had the greatest number of guests come and visit us ever, which was 4 students from the Eastern Region Ministry course where I teach at half-time. Other TEIs are apparently available, but they were all from ERMC. My 4 students found the sessions they observed by turns intriguing, puzzling, fascinating, impressive, informative, and even inspiring. And whether you are encouraged by that response from 4 ordinands or not, the point is that they were able to come because we were meeting on a Friday afternoon and a Saturday. By means of inviting guests, we can connect the work we do here with our constituencies and those who we might describe as stakeholders in what we do, and with the wider church and community. This is a good way of connecting the work that we do here with other places and with other people, and meeting on a Saturday makes it easier to do this by inviting guests. When the Saturday meeting was first mooted, I confess that I was at best rather ambivalent about it, and I'm now a convert to it. I'm not an incumbent, so if I now, but if I were still an incumbent, I might be still ambivalent. But I would like to commend the Business Committee for thinking about this and encourage them to think about making Saturday meeting a more constant part of what we do, not least because it enables us to invite guests to be part of what we're doing here. Thank you.
Jane Ozanne, followed by Caroline Herbert.
Ozanne, Oxford 379. Chair, I urge Synod to join me in voting against this report, given its decision, as set out in paragraph 27, that the various PMMMs and DSMs relating to matters intended to be addressed by the teaching document will not be scheduled for debate until 2020. In the inaugural debate of this quinquennium, I voiced a concern that I feared Synod was being managed. At the time I said, what I still believe, that we have to trust that God is working in and through us here. And I urged us to speak openly about our differences so we could discern a path forward here together. I now realise my fears were right. We've heard continuing calls from various members inside this chamber for debates relating to the matter of sexuality, so that they are on the record in public and for us all to hear. The sad truth, as I articulated in February last year, is that there has been and still is a severe breakdown in trust. Following the highly costly, both financially and personally, shared conversations process, we were told, as we are being told now, that the House of Bishops would listen and come back to us with a report. Sadly, our trust was broken and little has been done to mend it. Indeed, quite the opposite. There have been letters to America, groups appointed with poor representation of openly gay people, despite loud protestations in this chamber to the contrary, and the teaching documents chair is the one bishop who didn't vote to condemn conversion therapy. All this leads many of us to question whether radical Christian inclusion is just a trendy new catchphrase, hollow words with no substance. Synod, while we procrastinate and delay, people's lives are being ruined. These are not just theological differences we're playing with here, but people's futures, people's health, and people's long-term happiness. Real people, flesh and blood people, people who Christ told us to care about and serve. And what do? We delay, we silence, and we appear to ignore those cries that are just too inconvenient. Had we had the opportunity to debate things, I would believe that this could be a safe place for LGBTI Christians. But sadly, I don't believe it is at the moment. I really urge Synod to consider joining me in voting against this report and send a strong signal to the Business Committee of their concern with their damaging decision. Thank you.
Caroline Herbert, followed by Simon Clift.
Caroline Herbert, Norwich 370. Thank you for calling me, Chair. I think I'll start. I just want to thank the Business Committee for all the hard work they must have put in to compiling the agenda. It's not a job I would particularly envy them. And particularly for thanking them for the consideration they've clearly put into the issue referred to by the previous speaker about the scheduling of the various diocesan synod and private members' motions on the issue of human sexuality. We know this is a huge issue for this synod, and I would just like to put on record that I think they've made a wise decision here. We've commissioned people to go and work hard for 2 or 3 years to produce resources which will hopefully help us all to think about it, to engage with it, and then if there are debates on the floor of Synod, we will be able to do that in the best possible way, with resources drawing on the Bible, on theology, on history, on the social sciences. I think but we've got the opportunity to engage with those on Saturday afternoon, and I'm really pleased that we have that opportunity as well. I think I'm just sorry that I can't actually go to all the seminars. So that's what my first reaction when I saw the papers was, well, I want to hear about it all. And I don't know if there's going to be any possibility for any sort of reports, or whether if I want to hear about the ones I don't go to, that's just a question of talking to friends and trying to share ourselves out among them. So, and yes, the football as well. How can I choose between watching England and hearing about human sexuality?
Simon Clift, followed by Stephen Linus.
Simon Clift, Winchester 424. I recognise that I'm somewhat of a novice in terms of the procedures of this synod, but I was wanting to make a comment about the agenda and an omission, as I see it, on the agenda. Between the 17th and the 22nd of June, 1,950 Anglicans from 50 countries around the communion gathered in Jerusalem for the 3rd Global Anglican Future Conference, including 16 primates, 38 archbishops, and 316 bishops. The largest gathering of Anglicans for over 50 years. And at the end of this gathering, they released an official communication, a letter to the churches. I was not in Jerusalem, and I'm not a member of GAFCON, but a number of my friends did take part, whose opinions I value. As a mission partner in the 1990s within the province of Tanzania, we served under the authority of our diocesan bishop and worked side by side with such friends as partners in the gospel, and subsequently through local parish and diocesan links, I've had the privilege of spending time in the company of other leaders present in Jerusalem from the provinces of Uganda and Myanmar, and I recognise how much I have to learn from them. One senior church leader said to me in a personal communication regarding GAFCON, I must say the movement is growing, and the time spent at the conference was much rewarding. It is simply high time not to ignore the movement. Its impact is positively huge. These are voices of GAFCON, I believe, straightforward, godly men and women within the mainstream of the church who continue to look to the Bible as God's word and the historical teaching of the church for matters of faith and conduct. So 2 weeks on, when I looked at the agenda for this sitting, I was surprised and disappointed to see no time set aside for the presentation or an emergency debate on GAFCON, nor to hear plans for Synod to consider their letters to the churches. When I get home on Tuesday, my friends will be asking me, what did they say at Synod? What response did they give to the letters to the churches? My question is, fellow Synod members, what shall I tell them? Surely the voices of our GAFCON brothers and sisters, Anglican brothers and sisters, deserve to be listened to. And so please can we find a way of giving attention to what they're saying. I'm happy to leave it to others more knowledgeable about procedural matters to work out suitable mechanisms for this. But at the very least, I would encourage all of us to read the letter so that we can reach our own conclusions as to its substance. Thank you.
Stephen Linus, followed by Anthony Archer.
Stephen Linus, Bath and Wells, number 60. I'd just like to draw us for a moment into relatively non-controversial waters, if that's all right, by referring to paragraph 36 of the Business Committee report about the early morning communion service. Those of you who know me well will know that I'm not the greatest prayer in the world, nor am I sometimes interested in anything other than synod nerdiness. But on this matter, I'm slightly bothered. We've agreed, or it has been agreed, that we'll move the early morning communion forward to 7 o'clock, which gives people more time to get to breakfast and fringe meetings and all that stuff. I've been on this synod now for 13 July sessions, and it took me until about the 6th year before I realised that going to early morning worship was a really good thing to do. And the reason I started going regularly and getting myself out of bed and turning up and going to Berwick Hall, which is very well provided and is very nice, was we were in the middle of ongoing aggro about women and the episcopate, and it was all getting very difficult. And it came to me that I would do better in this process in the synod if I turned up to pray with people a bit more often, particularly with people I didn't agree with. So I made a resolution that I would turn up to the early morning Eucharist. So I just want to encourage those of you who like staying in bed, or who like me like staying up late in the Vanbrugh bar, that you would do well to think about coming to that early morning worship. You may hear a really nice homily from the person leading the service. You may not, but you may, so give it a go. More to the point, you will give yourself a bit of discipline in sitting next to and receiving the sacrament and hearing the words with people you don't necessarily agree with on the big topics that are annoying the synod, of which we've already heard some speeches in this particular item. So I do want to encourage you to go, as I will try and go, even though it's at 7 o'clock. So just have a think about that and think, can I do this? Yes, I can. The second thing is to ask the Business Committee specifically, is there some plan to review whether or not this works? Because what would be really sad would be, despite my encouragement, if the numbers attending the service fell off simply because it's at 7 o'clock. So I'm hoping the Business Committee and the chaplain have a process at the end of these sessions for saying, did the numbers fall off? If so, did we do the right thing by starting even earlier? Thank you.
Anthony Archer, followed by Andrew Corns.
Archer 393 St Albans. I enjoyed Mr Linus's important little speech, but I'm going to take the synod back, I'm afraid. Chairman, this is the second group of sessions in succession with no private members' motion scheduled for debate, albeit that we have a PMM listed as contingency business, but with the shape and detail in the agenda, I would be surprised if we get to it. I declare an interest, as the chair of the Business Committee has pointed out, as having a PMM on the lists. Leaving aside the subject matters covered by PMMs, I think this is starting to create an unfortunate precedent in terms of democracy and synod governance. Synod members support PMMs in the reasonable expectation they'll get debated, and those with the most support should get debated. There's been much said already in social and other media about this agenda and the fact that same-sex marriage and its myriad related issues have been kicked into the long grass by the Business Committee, and I think the House of Bishops may stand similarly accused. Chairman, no subject is of greater missional importance to the Church today. I get the fact that the teaching document process, with its snappy new long title, which I like, but it's so long I can't remember it, is the declared method of moving the process forward. But there is no expectation it will be met with any proposals until 2020. And I know there's an opportunity to engage with the issues in the groups tomorrow, either side of the football. We need to continue to debate elements of the subject on the floor of this synod. Synod members were elected to do that in 2015 and expect to do that, not to sit on their hands until the end of the quinquennium. But kicking into the long grass is the wrong idiom. You kick something into the long grass when you expect it will become forgotten. The effluxion of time will somehow lead to something more important. But nothing is more important. What the Business Committee and the House of Bishops have done is not to kick this into the long grass, but to kick the can down the road. You kick a can down the road, when you do that, it's noisy, it's clanky, and it gains publicity often unwanted. I urge Business Committee to reflect further on its strategy. I think it would be churlish to vote against this report, but I shall vote to abstain and urge members to consider doing likewise. Thank you.
Andrew Corns, followed by April Alexander.
Andrew Corns, Chichester 94. I've signed several PMMs and I'm eager to see them debated, but I believe the Business Committee has made a wise and entirely appropriate decision about PMMs and arson motions about sexuality. It's for the bishops to uphold and, where necessary, redefine the teaching of the Church of England, and the bishops have set up a very wide-ranging process to re-examine and then reaffirm or change the teaching of the Church of England on human sexuality. It also cannot be right for us to bring in new liturgical practices unless or until the teaching of the Church of England has been changed. So there are many other pressing issues as well that need to be discussed, not least the re-evangelization of this country and of other European countries more generally. So I commend the Business Committee's thoughtful and unanimous decisions, not only about human sexuality, but about the beautiful game.
April Alexander, followed by Sarah Schofield.
April Alexander, Southwark, 410. Thank you for calling me, Chair. I'd just like to draw attention to paragraph 39. I've got 2 points, and the first one is paragraph 39. I would like to think, I have an interest here, a great interest in disclosure and openness for elections. I would like to think that the online election process that is being piloted will include hustings, either in person or electronically. I would be very sad to see those disappear, but I can see that it's difficult, but I think it absolutely must be done. The second thing I'd like to say on the sexuality issue is this, that we have spent a very great deal of time in this synod and in our dioceses talking about this matter. What worries me a little that is in 2020 we will have a completely new synod who won't have gone through that process. And it seems to me that having spent all this investment of time on it, we should make the best of that and at least have plenty of time to talk from the experience that we've had over the last few years. Thank you.
Sarah Schofield, followed by David Lamming.
Thank you, Chair, for calling me. Sarah Schofield, Lichfield 147. I'd just like to ask the Business Committee, when you say 2020, for point of clarification, do you mean the last 2 sittings of the current synod or the first sitting of the next synod? Thank you.
David Lamming, followed by David Banting.
David Lamming, 399 St Edmundsbury in Ipswich. Mr Chairman, members of Synod, I'd like to consider and ask the Business Committee to revisit the decision not to hold a Synod on the contingency dates in November. We are going to be debating tomorrow morning issues of safeguarding, but we're going to be doing that without the benefit of any recommendations that come from the ICSA inquiry, who held a 3-week session, as you know, in February into the Diocese of Chichester, and we'll be holding another week session at the end of this month in relation to Bishop Peter Ball. And further, I think it's in September, there is to be a seminar on the issue of mandatory reporting. At the end of the March session of ICSA, the chairman announced that it was intended to publish a report on both the March session and the Peter Ball session in the autumn. One other matter which has not yet reached a conclusion is the investigation into the, quotes, fresh information about the late Bishop George Bell. And really, the debate that we're going to be able to have tomorrow morning, without being informed by the recommendations from ICSA, by whatever emerges from the fresh investigation, and we haven't yet been able to debate the Carlyle report, means, in my respectful submission, that we ought to be looking to use those available November dates. Might I just remind Synod of a couple of contributions that were made in this equivalent debate in London in February in relation to this very issue. Canon David Banting said in November 2017 there was more contingency time which we had all been asked to keep in our diaries, and there was nothing, despite requests and appeals. Please, Business Committee, and those with influence, may we have time. And my colleague from Suffolk, Jonathan Alderton Ford, I'm worried that as Synod gets shorter and shorter, we have less time together as fellow Christians, we listen to each other less. Synod, I call on you to urge for longer debates, to spend more time listening rather than speaking. And it's also the case that we have had probably limited time to consider such material as has been circulated for the debate tomorrow on safeguarding. In particular, of course, GS 2092 only 2 weeks ago, and the Singleton report, we now have that, although it was only due to be released on the 12th of July. So, Business Committee, I urge you to reconsider the question of whether we have a session in November when we could have at least a full day on the safeguarding issues. Thank you.
David Banting, followed by the gentleman at the back, please.
David Banting, 80. I came back from Jerusalem, a spectacular time, to an article in the church press which began, many General Synod members will be asking themselves whether there is any point in the annual trip to York this year. It was critical both of the agenda and of the business task group, the business committee. So I want to jump to their defence. I do have some comments to make, and I do not want to be misunderstood, like the MP who jumped up for the umpteenth time in his long parliamentary career to say, I object, was greatly misunderstood. All he wanted, as he had always wanted, was for the issues to be debated, and to be debated properly on the floor of the House. I realise that the Business Committee cannot initiate business. That's for the House of Bishops or the Archbishop's Council or the MPA or other such bodies. But it is to be fiercely independent. I remember the occasion when the General Synod refused to appoint a bishop to chair the Business Committee because it wanted it to be independent of the bishops. I have a good memory. I also want to have a good trajectory. So I'm beginning to notice that there is a rise in presentations, a rise in motions that cannot be separated or amended. There are shorter and shorter time for questions, even when presentations are made. There is the absence of debates about, well, is the General Synod beyond its sell-by date? We've been tinkering with the system and asking questions, but no serious debate about what's happening here. The GAFCON meetings began with an hour's Bible study and prayer and praise at the beginning of every day. There is much more attention to theology and Bible that should be built in to this synod to inform and to envision us, yes, but to set parameters for our debates and thinking. Where is the life of the Ecclesiastical Committee in Parliament represented? It seems to be a powerless body waving through stuff without understanding it. I'd love to know where we've got to with the state, between the state, this House, and the House of Parliament, for example. When will we be discussing Carlisle? When will we hear back for the Working Party after the independent reviewer report on the situation in Sheffield? I realise that looking back, the lack was only a year ago of proper space, responsible space and time for the science and the medical side of our debate left us with a very short debate and a very flaky debate and decision, in my opinion. So I want to encourage the Business Committee to maintain their proper independence. Thank you. I thank them for their work, and may they be bold in moving us forward and, yes, using November for the time. Thank you.
Point of order. I'm very easily tempted. Thank you.
Thank you, John Appleby, Newcastle 367. Thank you for calling me. I have to confess I've come to this synod less well prepared than ever before, because I've been going through what I call the long dark night of the kitchen refit for the last 3 weeks, and life has been a little stressful. I would be delighted to be corrected that I have overlooked something, but as it stands, I think there is something missing. In February, we debated Mission and Ministry and Covenant, GS 2086, and passed a motion that said, B, call on the Faith and Order Commission to report back to Synod at the next group of sessions on progress with the Methodist Church. And I also note that the Methodist Conference has been debating this issue in the last few days. I'm not aware this issue appears anywhere on the agenda. I hope somebody might have got it into the questions. I was too busy to submit one. If I'm wrong, I'm delighted. If I'm right, then would somebody please give a brief report on this issue? Thank you.
Point of order. That has my permission. Motion for closure. Could I see all those who are in favour? Thank you. All those who are against? Thank you. That is clearly carried. I therefore call on Canon Sue Boys to respond to the debate. And Sue, you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. I will do my best. Charles Reed, thank you very much. It's always really good to hear from a convert. And I would just like to tell Synod that we do give some time to thinking through items that it would be good for you to invite guests to hear, hence the environment debates appearing on Sunday afternoon. I want to try and answer Jane Ozanne, Caroline Herbert, and part of Anthony Archer all together. Although I think I did give an answer in my main speech, I do want to be clear that our decision was neither careless nor forced. But I do agree, Jane, that God, and pray that God is working in and through us, although we do not all agree about how we are working. Mr. Archer, I'm not good at kicking anything, footballs, cans, and even aiming into long grass. We are simply considering prayerfully what the agenda should be and trying to do our best for you, Synod, and for the Church as a whole. Dr. Clift, thank you. We had some correspondence about this before Synod, and I think we have heard what you've said, and certainly if somebody proposes something to the Business Committee, we will consider how it might be scheduled. A few years ago, we were all agreeing with Pete. I now want to agree with my friend Stephen. Early morning communions, a good thing, and we will be very sure to put in our feedback survey something about the revised time to see how that's going. I can only agree with Anthony Archer about the scheduling of private members' motions and assure him that because there is a private members' motion scheduled for contingency business, even if it is not taken now, it will be taken in February, and to promise that when we meet again as Business Committee in September and December about the February group of sessions, we will look very carefully at ourselves and at the PMMs to see which ones should be scheduled and to make sure that we do better. April Alexander, thank you for your thoughtful contribution about disclosure and openness for elections. There is no legal requirement for hustings, but I do know that the current guidance for returning officers suggests various ways in which they can be sure that important points are heard by the electorate. Sarah Schofield, I believe we mean July 2020. Mr. Lamming, it's really difficult, this November Synod business. We have not habitually held synods in November, and although I understand what you were saying, we don't know at what date there will be anything clear from ICSA. In the autumn is really a bit difficult, and in fact we would be planning a November Synod in September, so it would be foolish of us, in fact, to schedule something for November that we would have to plan in a vacuum in September. That doesn't mean we won't, as we've done in this group of sessions, think seriously about the proper way to schedule debates about this very serious business of safeguarding, but November would not be in the best interests of all of you. Mr. Banting, thank you for your commendation at the beginning of your speech. We try very hard, as I pointed out right at the beginning of this, to keep our proper, thoughtful, prayerful independence, but it is inevitable that not everybody will agree that that's what we've done. We give you of our best. And you may vote, as I've said before, as you wish. This is our best effort. Mr. Appleby, thank you for asking about the Methodist conference. I understand that the House of Bishops are to discuss this at their next meeting. And of course, if we are asked, indeed, I'm sure the Business Committee would welcome the opportunity to schedule a debate in February about this important issue. I'm on orange and I've finished. Thank you all very much indeed.
Item 4 is therefore before us, Synod, that the Synod do take note of this report. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against? Thank you. Any abstentions? Thank you. That concludes this item of business. We move on to the next item.
Members of Synod, we now come to item 500 on Special Agenda 1. And this is the final drafting stages of the draft Ecumenical Relations measure and the draft amending canon number 38. Members will need the draft measure GS 2046B, the draft amending canon GS 2047B, and the report of the steering committee GS 2046Z and 2047Z. Members should note that this is Article 7 business. I now call upon the Archdeacon of Southwark to move item 500, that the Synod do take note of this report. Archdeacon, you have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I promise not to take them. Jane Steen, Archdeacon of Southwark, Southwark 225. The Steering Committee has identified the need for 3 drafting amendments, as members will have seen, 2 to the draft measure and 1 to the draft amending canon. They are shown in bold type in GS 2046B and 2047B. Our report, which you also have before you, identifies and describes the effects of these amendments. Clause 2 of the draft measure will now make a further consequential amendment to the Ecumenical Relations measure 1988. That amendment ensures that the formal mechanism for entering into local ecumenical cooperative schemes fully takes account of the new power for bishops to designate partner churches at diocesan level. It does so by extending the definition of appropriate authority, which basically means a partner church's governing body, to cover partner churches that are designated at diocesan level. The amendment to the draft amending canon carries that extended definition through into the new Canon B43. The amendment to clause 3 of the measure clarifies the relationship between the new canon and the Code of Practice to be issued by the House of Bishops under the measure. These drafting amendments will ensure that the legislation works in an internally coherent way. They are all of a technical nature to enable the legislation to do what we intend it to do, and none of them raises any questions of policy. The committee is not proposing any special amendments. Thank you. Chair, do you want me to move now or in a moment? I have moved by speaking. I have moved the motion standing in my name, or whatever I've done. Thank you.
Item 500 is now open for debate, and the speech limit is 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Philip French, Rochester 388. Let me declare, if not an interest, then a context. I have the privilege to participate in a local ecumenical partnership of the Church of England and the United Reformed Church. Despite all the practical obstacles, we are richly blessed and challenged in our faith by the traditions and insights of both denominations. So naturally, I support the intention to make ecumenical cooperation less onerous and bureaucratic, more flexible and dynamic. What concerns me slightly is the wording and the impression that it may convey. The days of the local ecumenical project may be over, by common consent among denominations, but there is surely still an honoured place for a local ecumenical partnership. That concept is richer than a project, implying covenantal interdependence and a local constitution conformable to and supported by each of its denominations, going well beyond the language of this draft measure and canon of cooperative schemes. Looser, slighter associations may often best suit local needs and the promptings of the Holy Spirit. But what about those churches which have already chosen to enter into a deeper union at the local level, or may wish to,
that unity for which our Lord prayed. There seems little to encourage them here. We've been told that Churches Together in England is content with both the mechanisms and the terminology, but the governing bodies of other churches may have had little opportunity to reach a common mind on these matters. All too often, from the perspective of Free Church members in a local ecumenical project, our established church comes across as arrogant and overbearing. Let's try to avoid that mistake. So, while I will certainly support the motion before us and the vote for final approval on Monday, I would ask the House of Bishops and the Council for Christian Unity to take great care in taking this forward, to engage carefully and respectfully with other denominations, particularly the free churches, in how this very significant change regarding the present canons B43 and B44 is communicated, and over their own policy making and governance needs. Secondly, to consult widely on the code of practice before it is issued, including consulting with existing local ecumenical partnerships and with our ecumenical partners in those. And perhaps specifically in that code of practice, to consider whether the partnership option could still be described and encouraged as part of the broad spectrum of arrangements which this legislation would permit. Thank you.
I see no one standing, so I now invite the Archdeacon to respond to the debate.
Thank you, Chair. Jane Steen, Archdeacon of Southwark, Southwark 225. Thank you very much for that speech. There are two things that I'd like to say very, very clearly. The first is that this terminology is for our internal legislative purposes only. We are not imposing anything on any partner church or on anybody else, even if we were able to. The second thing is that the language of local ecumenical partnership has, is this correct? Yes. Let me make sure I'm saying what I'm supposed to be saying. The language that we are using is that which has been agreed with our ecumenical partners. We are not changing anything which Churches Together in England already uses or is agreed on. We are bringing forward a generic legal term for our own internal purposes. That's the kind of technical stuff. On a more personal, I suppose, or interpersonal level, there's nothing in this legislation to prevent the depth of relationship which was described in this speech. And on the contrary, we would encourage relationships between Christians to be of the nature of relationships expressed by the word covenant. And finally, thank you so much for the suggestion of consultation at the stage of the Code of Practice. That is not something that I in any way can influence, but I think Synod would not be minded to disagree with you that consultation would be a good thing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
I now put item 500 to the vote by a show of hands. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. That is clearly carried. The draft ecumenical relations measure and the draft amending canon number 38, being Article 7 business, now stand committed to the House of Bishops. And that concludes this item of business. And so we now move to the next item of business. Again, I think. We now move to item 504 on special agenda 1. This item 2 is also Article 7 business. And we now take the final drafting stage of the draft Church of England miscellaneous provisions measure. Members will need the draft measure GS 2064B and the report of the steering committee GS 2064 504Z. And it's my pleasure to invite Ms. Josiel Munro to move item 504, that the Synod do take note of this report. Josiel, you have up to 10 minutes.
Josiel Munro, London Diocese 356. Thank you, Chair. I just want to bring to your attention that the steering committee has agreed a number of drafting amendments to this measure. They are identified and described in the report of the steering committee and have been made to clarify any remaining uncertainties of meaning and to improve the drafting. The steering committee is not proposing any special amendments for this. I do so move.
Item 504 is now open for debate. I see no one standing, so I now, by a show of hands, put item 504 to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. Item 504 is clearly carried. The draft measure, being Article 7 business, now stands committed to the House of Bishops. And this now concludes this item of business.
Synod, we now come to item 510, draft amending canon number 40, which is before Synod for first consideration. For this, members will need the draft amending canon GS 2103 and the explanatory memorandum GS 2013X. I call on the Chair of the Steering Committee, the Bishop of Manchester, to move item 510, that the canon entitled Amending Canon number 40 be considered for revision in committee. Bishop, you have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. David Walker, Manchester, number 27. Synod, thank you for agreeing overwhelmingly at our February group of sessions that there should be a canon specifically focused on our religious communities. Just to prove the Church of England can sometimes act quickly, I'm delighted to be able to present to you only 5 months later the draft version of such a canon for first consideration. Having had that previous debate so recently and with such strong support, I'm presuming that you don't need me to go over the grounds of why such a canon is needed in any great depth. At its most succinct, this is about our owning our religious communities within the Church of England, making our expectations and support for them clearer, better facilitating the ordination and licensing of ministers to serve in them, and providing the right framework for the discharging of their safeguarding responsibilities. I was called as a witness by the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse in March, The inquiry officers and panel were very keen to hear what we as a church were doing to ensure that religious communities fell within our safeguarding procedures. The news that Synod had asked for a canon to be put forward was very well received. And so here we are with our initial draft. One of the most important things about this canon is how it proposes to shape the work that we do with our religious communities. Creating or revising a canon is not a quick or simple process. Hence, its direct scope is restricted to those things that require it to be on its face, underneath which it sets out the places where more detailed and changeable work will happen. In particular, the vast majority of the support and oversight for communities from the national church will be held where it has been for the last 80 years or so, by the Advisory Council on Relations between Bishops and Religious Communities, which I chair. Back in December, in anticipation of our work, the Council was reconstituted as a formal committee of the House of Bishops, hence the various references to the House of Bishops in the text before us. The House delegates its oversight of religious communities to the Council, but of course it can always, as in the past, overrule its subsidiary body should it be minded so to do. That changes nothing. The text of the canon sets out the very broadest definition of a religious community and leaves the precise determination of whether a particular one should be recognised or acknowledged to the House of Bishops. It is vitally important that we don't over-specify on the face of the canon itself. Over the centuries, the religious life has taken many and varied forms. In this present generation, God is once again calling groups of men and women to fresh ways of living lives shaped by it. Proper discernment of whether a community represents an authentic expression or development of the religious tradition cannot be totally captured by legal texts. Rather, it needs to be worked through between the community itself and the institutions of the church. In particular, the Advisory Council, where a wealth of supplementary material and guidance already lies, and where more can easily be developed as circumstances evolve. Hence, at the heart of the canon lies the power and responsibility of the House of Bishops to acknowledge or recognise a community, and, the necessary other side of the coin, to remove such acknowledgement or recognition for an appropriately grave cause. The draft canon then goes on to set out the two main types of accountability which it puts in place: regulation and guidance. These are terms which Synod members will be familiar with from many pieces of legislation in recent years. They're also well-accepted concepts in wider British law. But bluntly, regulation tells me what I have to do, guidance tells me what I have to have a very convincing case for not doing. And because regulation is such a strong concept, the canon sets out the sorts of areas where it will be proper for the House of Bishops, via the Advisory Council, to regulate. These are things such as finance, governance, safeguarding, and vows. It's not a list that I imagine conveys any surprises. Moreover, the canon sets out that any such regulatory material must be laid before us here in Synod for our approval. Mandatory requirements are too serious to be delegated to a lower level. The canon is supported by you today. I'd expect to set up a working group from the Advisory Council who will work through the autumn in parallel and in close contact with the revision committee for this canon, so that the initial regulatory work is ready to lay before you as soon as possible. Guidance comes with a lower degree of requirement. Much of what is contained in the Handbook on the Religious Life, which has existed since the 1940s, constitutes guidance. It's here that detailed work, taking account of the different types of community and the appropriate shape for such communities, is held. The canon doesn't change any of that. It merely notes that it has the status of formal guidance in the Church of England. All of what I've spoken about so far, Chair, comes in the first main section of the draft canon. The remaining clauses deal with the ordination and licensing of persons to serve in holy orders in a religious community. Depending on your overall view of the episcopate, my colleagues and I have in the past either been creatively imaginative or disingenuous in the ways we've had to find to ordain, license, or give authority to minister to clergy working from a base in such communities. That can leave both such priests themselves and the wider church unsure of where their accountability lies and from where they can expect to receive training, support or development review. It can also deny them their rights to participate properly in our synodical processes, including here. The Advisory Council looked at a number of options as to how to help regularise the situation, but felt that clear canonical provision was by far the best and simplest step, especially if the Church was looking to create a canon anyway. That final couple of clauses in the canon will also require some minor work via the Miscellaneous Provisions Measure number 2. This is also starting its journey with us over this current group of sessions. Those of you who've already read your papers for the latter parts of Synod will have spotted where that will come. It does no more than is necessary to complement the canon. Synod, thank you once again for asking for this canon to be brought forward. I beg to move the motion standing in my name.
The motion is now open for debate. I would remind members that under Standing Order 51, speeches must be directed to the general purport of the canon rather than to points of detail. I call Mr. Clive Scowen and a gentleman at the back.
Thank you, Chair. Scowen, London 358. I welcome this draft canon, quite apart from the safeguarding concerns which obviously have made this a matter of urgency. I think it's right that we should give religious communities a place in our canon law. But I have some questions. Firstly, it's not wholly clear from the papers whether this draft canon is intended to apply to the small missional communities which are increasingly growing up, particularly in urban areas, some operating under bishops' mission orders, but not necessarily. The definition of a community in the canon would appear to include them, but it's not entirely clear whether that's intended. If it is intended, then I suggest that as it stands, the canon is insufficiently flexible for these rather more fluid, rapidly developing small communities. I would like to suggest that for missional communities at least, it would make much more sense if the House of Bishops were to delegate the approval or designation of these communities to individual diocesans. But I do wonder whether a community operating under a bishop's mission order really needs to be covered by the canon at all. But either way, we need clarity on that point. I also question the proposal to prescribe a minimum size for a religious community. Again, I think this could pose particular problems for missional communities, where the membership might be rather more fluid than in a more traditional monastic community. But I would, in any event, wonder whether a minimum number is appropriate. Clearly, a community needs to be more than one person, but when our Lord promises that when 2 or 3 gather in his name, he is with them, who are we to impose a greater number? Even traditional monastic houses are now sometimes very small. Think of the community of St Margaret at Walsingham, which I believe is now just 3 strong. Are these faithful nuns who have sustained the church by their prayers for decades to be told that they no longer qualify as an Anglican religious community? So, Chair, I will support first consideration because I think the principle of this canon is good, but I hope that the points that I've made will be given serious consideration by the Revision Committee. Thank you, Chair.
I also sorry, you didn't hear that. Peter Ouch, Winchester 234. Chair, thank you for calling me to speak. I also very much support the proposing of this canon. We need to become a more creative church in our mission, and this allows us the possibility to recognise creative missional endeavour, creative forms of Christian life. We must seize the opportunity to do it. To be a truly creative church requires that first step of adventure and the ability to recognise it. To continue to be a creative church also requires the ability to recognise when something has run its course. To start well, one must also be able to end well, and do so consistently. One might say, if we had more of that facility about us, we wouldn't need to have quite such an extensive programme of renewal and reform, because we would be doing it anyway. I very much hope that the regulations that accompany this canon will have guidance about ending well, so that we can also begin well. Whether it is possible to affirm that as a positive part of being a creative Christian community in the text of the canon, I do not know, but I think it is worth considering. Thank you.
Thank you. The Bishop of Willesden, followed by Stephen Trott.
Pete Broadbent, Bishop of Willesden, 46 Southern Suffragans. I too welcome the direction this is taking. I think we've got to be clear that the more we do things by regulation and code of practice, the more difficult and obscure it is to make those things work. And I think Clive Scowen's words earlier were things we ought to heed. The parallel with Bishop's mission orders, we are operating under a code of practice. You will have, if you read through all the papers for the Synod, seen the BMO code of practice has been amended and simplified. It's still pretty long and pretty turgid, and many of my Episcopal colleagues find it quite hard to find their way through it in order to make it work. It would be foolish, I think, if we devised a similar kind of framework for religious communities. Just simply because if we devise secondary legislation that's impenetrable, you can't make it work. So I would urge simplicity and clarity in the drafting. And I think in two particular ways. One is to make sure you're clear what you're trying to achieve by these designations. We've had terrible problems in the past with religious orders where we don't know who's actually ultimately accountable, and the visitor hasn't been able to be found, and therefore we can't actually get things done when there are issues of governance or issues of finance. So we need some clarity about that. We also need some clarity about how, Mr. Scowen touched upon it, that this thing differentiates itself from an ordinary bishop's mission order, and whether actually you can run things under two regimes, because it's quite possible that something could be both a BMO and a religious community, and which bit of the guidance covers which bit. So there's some drafting that needs to be done very carefully here. I hope we can give this a good wind, but I hope we won't get lots of regulations which actually are impossible to understand and therefore to implement.
Thank you. Stephen Trott, followed by this gentleman here.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen Trott, Peterborough 194. Again, I welcome all the work that's been done so far, recognising that it's often quite difficult to describe what exactly a religious community is, because the charisms of the various founders of the religious communities that we know vary so widely. And in the world church, there are many thousands, perhaps, of religious orders, all subtly different from each other. So it's going to be quite a difficult task to produce regulations that address all circumstances. But I have just a few questions at this stage, which I hope I might register. First of all, the process of giving recognition to a religious community, will this process be by the consent or by the invitation of the religious community in question, or will the Church of England take a direct approach towards religious communities and say, we want to regulate you? So that's the first question. The second question is a definition question. What kind of community? Are we talking about life vows? Are we talking about those who've taken a vow of celibacy as part of belonging to that community? Or will this include the much wider societies that exist in the Church of England and have been around for a very long time, such as the Society of the Holy Cross. And thirdly, in section 3, there's reference to financial affairs, and I'd like to ask if the regulations will in any way duplicate the responsibilities of the charity commissioners. I think it's a good idea to avoid duplication, if at all possible. Thank you, Chair.
This gentleman followed by gentleman in green shirt.
Tiff Robinson, Edmondsbury Ipswich 209. As Stephen Trotz just mentioned, one of the concerns I have is that this doesn't ever actually ask in the canon we have before us for consent from the community itself. It may well be the House of Bishops will have that in their own processes for recognition, but I feel it would be best written into the canon to avoid any confusion later on, especially as this isn't just for established traditional communities, but is framed quite widely. Thank you.
Thank you. Followed by the thank you.
Ian Yem, Bristol 261. I wasn't expecting to speak, so thank you for calling me. It's a maiden speech. Hurrah. I was, for 5 years of my life, a member of a Roman Catholic religious order, the Canons Regular of Prémontré. Try saying that when you've had a few. That means that I have lived under canons, rules, constitutions, statutes, and various chapters. It can be very complex. I was curious to see, therefore, how this motion would come together, how this canon would come together. And one of the things that was a great blessing in religious life was to have a superior. And I was interested to see whether or not that role of a major superior, who in my case would have been also an ordinary of the church, and have had responsibilities of dialogue between bishops and religious communities, which preserves the autonomy of those religious communities, would be preserved in this canon in some way. I'm really interested just to understand whether or not the group looking at this looked to Roman Catholic provision to understand a little bit better what was available there in a long and respected history of the religious life, but also whether or not there was some way in the canon of preserving that autonomy that exists in those religious communities under major superiors who are ordinaries in their own right and sometimes have dialogue roles of communication with the House of Bishops. This particular canon puts a lot of responsibility on the House of Bishops, and I'm concerned about the autonomy and growth of these communities as they go forward. Thank you.
Veronica, followed by Francis or Ewing was standing. Yes, thank you.
Simon, about the Southwark 219, the Bishop of Lambeth told me a joke the other week about 3 things the Pope doesn't know. One is what a Jesuit is thinking. Another is how much money the Salesians have got. And the third is how many female religious orders there are in the Roman Catholic Church. So the point that Mr. Scowen made about what constitutes a religious community is actually quite important. I take very seriously the point made by the Bishop of Willesden about over-regulating. But one area where it may be that some consideration needs to be given in revision is the whole area of where discipline applies as well. Around, obviously, clergy who are licensed in religious orders are going to be covered by the clergy discipline measure, or hopefully its successor in due course. But the nature of discipline in a religious community, especially in perhaps newer forms of religious community, might be quite unclear. And there could be a situation where some members of that community are subject to certain sorts of discipline and others would not be, and that could lead to tensions within the community. And I think some guidance, or indeed possibly even some regulation around that area, might be helpful. And I just offer that to the revision committee for future consideration.
Thank you. Frog or Ewing, 191, Oxford. Just want to speak, it's my maiden speech as well, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. Just want to say very, very warmly supportive of the general direction of where this is going. I want to warmly commend my colleagues and other members of this House to vote in favour of this. That having been said, there's a couple of points of clarification that have been brought up as well, I think. The simplicity issue is absolutely crucial to make sure that it's actually usable and doable, and not so impenetrable that even though it's right on paper, nobody else knows what it means. So it's got to be actually usable. A second area of clarification, I think, the language using where the bishops come in is very loose. It doesn't say whether it's an area bishop, a suffragan bishop, a diocesan bishop, or a visiting bishop, a bishop visitor to the order as well. And there's some unnecessary ambiguity there, which I think could clarify this quite well, particularly because, and this affects BMOs as well, if things go beyond an area, one of the great advantages of the monastic communities and the religious communities is that they have a fluidity about them, particularly geographically or for the amount of time somebody might be in one place or other. And I think that's just something that ought to be represented in the legislation. And the last is really to chime on what one of my colleagues has already said as well, which is to protect the autonomy. It's very, very easy for the House of Bishops or advisory groups or even General Synod to dole out codes of conduct without having properly asked whether those codes of conduct have not just been consulted but actually approved by key religious communities. So not just consulting them but actually saying, we would like to know as General Synod, I think, that key religious communities, including newly approved ones and registered ones, such as the 24/7 prayer group that's just come through as well, are actually warmly enthusiastic of them. It would be good for us to know that when we're voting, that they're on board, rather than just that it meets the requirements of legislation. Thank you very much.
I see no one else standing, so I call on the Bishop of Manchester to reply. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the overwhelming support for this that I've heard from Synod. If I may address some of the particular points made. Does it apply to small missional communities, such as exist under BMOs? No, by and large, we're not expecting to have kind of double regulation there, that small missional communities will continue where they are. If such a community gets to the point where it wants to become a formal religious community of the Church of England, of course it will approach us in the normal way. And I think that leads on to the point that there's no compulsion here. No group of Christians who associate together is going to be compelled to come forward to register or be acknowledged. But if they want to be officially part of the Church of England structures, if they want to be able to elect members to this General Synod, if they want to be under the oversight of the Church of England, to be owned by the Church of England, then they will choose to come forward to become part of our official family. Minimum size, that's always existed. That we've always said half a dozen is the size at which we should begin to recognise or acknowledge a community. Much smaller than that, and the communities tend to be so fragile that that they've not reached a level of stability you can have that kind of protracted conversation. But when a community becomes small, yes, it's up to it when it winds up, and some communities do only have 2 or 3 members still living and part of them. That they choose when they want to wind up if they feel they've got too small. There's no threshold going down. It's simply when a community is being recognised the first time. Which again leads us to how communities end well. Much of what's been said in this debate is stuff that exists in the handbook on the religious life, and we're proposing very little that's new. Really what we'll be doing will be extracting from the existing handbook over the next few months those things that are so paramount importance that they require to be expressed in the regulations, and you will see a draft version of those regulations, I hope, before we ask you for agreement on the canon itself. Of course, we can't formally put regulations in place until after the canon, which allows such regulations to be written. We're not going to make things complicated. No, it's what already exists and is working well with religious communities acknowledged and recognised in the Church of England. Grateful for Stephen Trott welcoming the work we've been done so far. Will it be by consent? Yes, it will always be consent. Communities have to approach us. We do not approach a community and say we think you should be recognised or be acknowledged. They approach us. And any community that wishes to be de-recognised or cease to be acknowledged, of course, at any time it can do that if it wishes. Vows, yes, there are a great variety of vows that take place. I'm a Third Order Franciscan. I'm under very different vows than that of a Benedictine living in an abbey somewhere. And so there needs to be that variety, and that's why an awful lot of the work is under the bonnet. It's in the guidance, it's in the, well, mostly in the guidance, a little bit in the regulations. Will it duplicate the Charity Commissioners? No. We're very clear that we're not going to attempt to duplicate the work that the Charity Commissioners do. A major superior who isn't accountable to the usual ordinary. The policy of the Church of England is such that the diocesan bishop has responsibility for all ordained ministry, in particular, that operates in her or his territory. The diocesan can always delegate to a suffragan under the rules that apply, or to one of the assistant bishops, as the Bishop Maidstone or the Bishop Beverley in my own patch. But there won't be independent superiors. There never have been. Communities all have a visitor. That is a requirement. The visitor is in Anglican Episcopal orders, and that will continue, but that visitor does not have jurisdiction that can take something out of the oversight of the local diocese. That's not a change. That's how it always has been in the Church of England. Simon Butler asking where discipline lies. Obviously for clergy it lies on the clergy discipline measure. For those who are not in ordained ministry, then the Handbook on the Religious Life contains clear guidance as to how discipline is expected to be carried out within communities, usually with an ultimate appeal to the visitor of the community, and in very, very grave matters, for example, where somebody is being expelled from a community for having abandoned its life or committed some grievous sin, normally under one of the Henry VIII Acts, that lies with the Archbishop of Canterbury as the successors of the papal legate from those pre-Reformation days. He usually consults with me before exercising that power, and does so only very rarely. Frogor Ewing, thank you for your maiden speech. Yes, we're keeping it simple, but basically continuing with the handbook that's existed for the last 70 years or so. Who licenses? Yes, the diocesan bishop. Geographical fluidity. Yes, we accept that members of religious communities move around. I'm a Franciscan. Franciscans tend to move around quite a lot. But the rights of any diocesan bishop as to the conduct of ordained ministry within her or his diocese are not something that we're going to be undermining through this proposal. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, David. So we now put item 510 to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. That is carried. So the draft amending canon is now automatically committed to a revision committee. And as stated in the agenda, any member who wishes to submit proposals for amendment should send them in writing to the Clerk of the Synod to reach her no later than Friday, the 10th of August. And now, as indicated earlier in our session, in order to enable good order of business, I will now adjourn the sitting for 10 minutes to allow members to take a short break. The next item will resume promptly in 10 minutes, and a bell will be rung 1 minute before the business will resume. You are asked to be back in your seat by that time.
Good afternoon, everyone. We come to item 5 on our agenda, questions, which I know for some people is one of the highlights of our group of sessions. Members have been sent the full question notice paper by email, and then there are the hard copies available on the seating around you. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind fellow members of Synod that when it comes to asking a supplementary question, there are a couple of things. One is then that members should give their name, diocese and Synod number before asking their question, and then a simple, single question which can be answered in a straightforward way rather than a speech must be asked. I'm emphasising that, everyone. So no composite questions, please. Otherwise, I would have to call it out of order, which I'd rather not do. The same goes for questions which contain arguments, imputation, ask for expressions of opinion, including on legal questions, or which ask for solution to a hypothetical problem. Also, on a practical note, if you intend to ask a supplementary question, then please make your way to one of the microphones as quickly as possible. This will help us to get through more questions. So let's make a start. The first batch of questions is for the Mission and Public Affairs Council. That's questions 1 to 4. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Scone, thank you. Clive Scone.
Scone, London 358. What would the chair of MPA recommend that members of this synod, and indeed faithful Anglicans up and down the country, should do to support the efforts of the Bishop of St Albans and the MPA staff in demanding that the government live up to its promise to take a stand, as the Secretary of State put it, and to reduce the maximum stake for fixed odds betting terminals to £2 before the end of this year?
Thank you very much. Mark Sheard, London 464. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Scown. I would urge them to do everything possible. I think this synod very rightly and passionately voted in favour of reducing fixed odd betting terminal. We cannot leave it there. We must rejoice at being heard, but we must not allow this in any way to be delayed in implementation. I would urge people to write to their MPs, write to ministers, maybe even follow Mr. Scown's example of writing to the Times, along with others. Do all possible. If it would be, anybody has any further suggestions about how we can keep the pressure on to eradicate or minimise the evil of fixed odd betting terminals, get the government to hold up to its commitment, then we would welcome them, and we will do all we can to support them and to encourage other people to do so.
Question 2. Yes, Charles Reid, thank you. Supplementary.
Charles Reid, Norwich 181. Is the MPA aware that some of the clergy who are EU citizens are finding the process so far anything but straightforward?
We are hearing that life is, in so many areas, not as straightforward as often we're led to believe. I must confess to being slightly surprised to find this particular item on the Mission and Public Affairs agenda. It felt to me that it could well sit well within MINDEV. I believe the chair of the MINDEV Council has a vested family interest in this particular matter, and I'm sure he would welcome any further discussion in the Vanbrugh Bar at a later stage.
Question 3. Yes, thank you.
Andrea Williams, Chichester 286. will the Church of England response affirm and confirm the Church of England teaching that marriage is between one man and one woman, and that sexual relations are intended for the expression only in marriage as so defined?
Excuse me, that's outside the remit of the original question. Thank you. Question 4. So, moving on to the next section of questions, which come under the Business Committee, questions 5 and 6. Thank you.
Timothy Good, Southwark 221. I note that in your answer you stress that the new teaching document will not necessarily be simply a report with recommendations, but that it will include the creation of a range of resources. Would you agree that for the Archbishop of Canterbury's call for a radical new inclusion to have any incurrency in Anglican ecclesiology, these resources need to include liturgical resources, and that without liturgical resources, the call for a radical new inclusion would simply become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal? Thank you.
That you are asking me for an opinion, which I'm not able to give.
Yes, I concur, Sue. Thank you. Yes, Clive Scone, supplementary.
Scone, London 358. Is the chair of the Business Committee aware of the widespread relief felt by many members of Synod, and indeed of the Church of England, that Synod is to be spared further divisive and premature debate on this issue until we have all received the benefit of the learning and wisdom of the Living in Love and Faith report?
Mr. Scowen, I and the rest of Synod have heard your comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 6. All right, let's move on to the section under the Crown Nominations Commission, which covers questions 7 and 8. Question 7. Thank you, April Alexandra.
April Alexander, Southwark 410. What wonderful candidates must be the 40% have been, with the numbers so stacked against them. Would the Archbishop not agree that other very high calibre women would have been appointed had all considerations been without reference to gender? And if not, is there a good reason why 60% of the appointees were male?
Excuse me, it's an expression of opinion, so we can leave that one. Let's move on to question 8. Yes, thank you. Mark Lucas.
Mark Lucas, Peterborough 193. Whilst noting the answer I received to my question, I would like to remind you that the Bishop of Maidstone has no vote in the House of Bishops, and in response to the final paragraph of the answer, Development and Appointments Group have asked the Chair of the Implementation and Dialogue Group to include senior appointments in its work as it considers examples of good practice and design resources. Is it time to include matters of churchmanship in unconscious bias training, and perhaps even to introduce quotas in order to ensure mutual flourishing?
The Crown Nomination Commission has gone through unconscious bias training, and that actually covers every bit of bias that you may think of.
Yes, Mary Durlaka for a supplementary. Thank you.
Mary Durlaka, Chelmsford 271. Could the Archbishop confirm that the CNC will specifically give dedicated time to its reflections on the practical implications for it of mutual flourishing, rather than doing so if time allows during a particular appointment process?
Excuse me, that's not to do with the original question, so we'll leave it there as well. Thank you. Right, now we move on to questions under the Church Commissioners, questions 9 to 11. Question 9. All right, let's move on to question 10 over the page. Yes, thank you for a supplementary.
Keith Cordran, Liverpool 345. Will the First Estates Commissioner ensure that there is discussion in the Board of the Commissioners of the proposition that in declining to put into the public domain financial forward planning information that is clearly available, the Commissioners are falling short of the expectations of transparency and openness that we have of ourselves and of others, including those in whom we invest?
Thank you very much for the question. We do obviously want to be transparent and accountable. We publish well in advance to those people who receive funding from us what we expect them to receive in the coming triennium. The current plan for expenditure was shared in 2016, as I said in my written answer, and we are before you on Monday reporting on the year gone by, when you can ask us any questions at all about how we've spent our money. But I hear the sense of passion in the question, and I will indeed reflect on it with my colleagues. Thank you.
Question 11. Yes, thank you. Jay Green, thank you.
Jay Green, yep. Thank you for your answer, but can you tell us how the Church Commissioners monitor when dioceses do not comply? Because we are concerned in our diocese and in our deanery about the significant bad publicity.
Thank you very much, Jay, for your question and for giving me this opportunity to talk about glebe, because this will be the first and last opportunity I shall be able to do so, as the legislation is changing, so future glebe cases won't come to us with representations. Just to say that we have, as I said in my reply to you, issued guidance to dioceses that we do expect them to have regard to. There won't be in the future any possibility of appeal if local people feel that they haven't been consulted. But there is an opportunity under Section 19 of the Endowments and Glebe measure, I think it is. There's a section that allows the commissioners to suspend the operation of a diocese's glebe management scheme if there are procedural problems. So if you do feel there is anything material of that nature happening, then do consult about that particular measure.
Thank you. And the next section is on the for the Pensions Board, question 12. Yes, thank you. Stephen Linus, to ask a supplementary.
Stephen Linus, Bath&Wells, number 60. I will undeclare an interest, as I have my own house and will not be requiring Pensions Board housing, but on behalf of a friend, as people say, and many members of the House of Clergy, I suspect. Thank you for your answer. The concern that has been expressed to me is that the service given by Sanctuary is not effectively monitored by the Pensions Board. A case is not relevant here, but 9 visits to fix a shower and no loft insulation in a house that, according to your answer, has been inspected. So will the board consider more direct consultation with tenants rather than just 1 month after they've moved in, but after some experience of having Sanctuary supposedly looking after them?
To consider that proposal and with my colleagues to see what can be done that is both practical and helps us to monitor the Sanctuary performance better than we do at present. Though we do have a range of survey data available to us, which on the whole is very favourable.
Thank you. Moving on then to the Central Readers' Council, there's one question for them, question 13. Yes, Clive Scowen, a supplementary, thank you.
Scowen, London 358. Will the House of Bishops now amend their regulations regarding reader ministry to bring them into line with the retirement provisions for clergy on common tenure, and so enable readers to continue to be licensed beyond the age of 70 if they, their incumbent and their PCC wish it and the bishop considers it appropriate.
Martin Seeley 35. I'm standing in for the Bishop of Leicester, and I will take that question to the Bishop of Leicester, who is the chair of the Central Readers' Council.
Thank you. Now we move on to questions 14 to 28 for the Archbishop's Council. Question 14, first of all. Yes, thank you. Kate Wharton, thank you.
Kate Wharton, Liverpool 157. Would the Archbishop's Council consider looking at the total resources available for mission across different dioceses and drawing attention to any inequalities which might exist, and to researching a mechanism which would allow transfer of assets between dioceses in the spirit of mutuality and sharing all things in common in a way which satisfies charity law?
John Spence, Archbishop's Council 467, thank you. There are two elements to this. Will we look at the total investable assets of each diocese? Yes, we will. We will be taking them into account as we deal with the various requests of us as we enter into the 2020 to 22 triennium. It would be quite wrong of me to make any approach for additional funding from the Church Commissioners if we had not equally understood that every part of the Church, every diocese where it can afford to do so, plays its part in that. The question of taking steps for the transfer of assets between dioceses would be one that would require significant legislation and could only occur not with the will of the Archbishop's Council, but with the will of Synod.
Thank you. Question 16. Oh, 15, beg your pardon. Keith? Yes, thank you, Keith Gordon.
Keith Cordron, Liverpool 345. I thank Canon Spence for the information that he has provided, and in noting that he's not provided all that I actually referred to. And will he ask the Finance Committee to consider whether it's right that seeking basic information about financial planning decisions should sometimes feel like pulling teeth? Thank you.
The last thing I'd wish Keith to feel is that his teeth are being pulled. I would observe if I try to pull teeth, I'll probably end up in the armpit. But Keith, you made a very good point, and I gave you an answer, and it's been the subject of further conversation since. I'm going to be having a conversation with Mary Chapman, the chair of the Audit Committee, as to how best we can give you the information you require. I suggested I might do that through the Strategy Investment Board report. We will debate whether it would be better as an adjunct to the report and accounts of the Archbishop's Council, taking into account that you can't be selective as to which grants you're going to publish. If you need to do it, you really ought to do it for them all, and that will mean quite a lot of work and quite a lot of potential cost. But we will look at it, Keith, and I will want your mouth to feel much more comfortable in future.
Thank you. Question 16. Let's move on to question 17. Yes, thanks, Paul Benfield. Thank you for a supplementary.
Blackburn 66. Is consideration being given to withholding funding from dioceses which do not show that they are distributing the funds to the lowest income communities?
Thank you, Father Benfield, and I would sincerely hope that that is not the case. As I've indicated in my response, we are collating all the reports that have come in from the dioceses at this stage, and I have no reason to believe that they are using them in any other way than that which it was intended. We are firmly committed to continuing funding for lower income communities. We will in any case need to review the methodology of that at the end of the 17-19 triennium and ahead of the 2022 triennium in order that we can ensure that they are being most efficacious from the viewpoint of the diocese and the needs of those communities. With the leave of the chair, I would be grateful if I could clarify some points, as members have identified that there are some differences in numbers in various reports. The number of dioceses receiving link community funding are 25. There is a report, an element in the report and accounts of the Archbishop's Council which refers to 26. That is because under that one heading they included the one grant to the Diocese of Europe. That was for convenience, but it is not, of course, link funding. And in the Church Commissioner's report, you'll hear reference to 27, and that's because on top of those 26, there is reference to the one diocese that receives transition funding, but not link funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Question 18. Question 19. Question 20. Yes, thank you. Stuart, 5 for a supplementary.
David Lamming, 399, St Edmund in Ipswich. If necessary, I declare an interest, first of all, as a member of the revision committee for this particular measure referred to in the question. At the end of the question, at the end of the answer, you say that steps are being taken to constitute scrutiny committee. Bearing in mind that the standing orders which were distributed to us today provide that the scrutiny committee is to include 3 members of Synod elected by the Synod and 3 members appointed by the Appointments Committee, and that the first election of members must take place as soon as reasonably practicable after this standing order comes into operation. Can you give Synod any guidance as to what the timetable is for establishing the committee?
Mr. Lamming, as you will see, the measure only received royal assent in May, so the actual committee has only just been. I imagine that, although I can't quite get the answer quite so clearly as you might hope, that the election process will take place in the normal way, and I would imagine that will happen in the next few months. It is certainly, although the committee hasn't met yet, it's our intention that we should bring lay and order before this synod early next year, with a view to taking the process forward from there. So I hope very much that we will have a scrutiny committee in place in order to take the whole process forward.
Apologies, David Lamming, for getting muddled up. So moving on to question 21. Yes, thank you, Gavin Oldham, for a supplementary.
Gavin Oldham, Oxford 378, and I hope all members will have seen your call for dioceses to make visibility of community action a central part of their mission. Is the Archbishop's Council aware of a strong correlation between the decline in the Church's membership and the handing over of welfare responsibility to the state over the past 70 years, as resolved by the Lambeth Conference in 1948? The text of that resolution is shown in question 36.
Yes, indeed.
Actually, this is outside the scope of the question, so of the original question. So let's move on to question 22. Yes, thank you, Jane Ozam, to ask a supplementary.
Roseanne, Oxford 379. Will the Setting God People Free team ensure it encourages awareness and connection to groups which promote the role of lay leadership for all Anglicans, independent of their sexuality, and not those groups which say that we have to be disciplined and not allowed to be part of a lay leadership team?
I think Setting God's People Free is indeed for all people.
Thank you. So you will only promote those groups which do all.
Jane, thank you. Okay.
I don't think that's quite what I said, Jane, is it?
Okay. Right, question 23. All right, then over the page to question 24. Yes, thank you.
Debbie Buggs, London 353. Will the people who work on the website consider communicating with Matthias Media to see whether the material can be hosted on the Church of England website as well?
Thank you, Bishop.
think that the answer to the question is that I will take this up and see what we may do, but I can't give you an immediate answer.
Thank you. Question 25. Yes, thank you, Robin Lunn, to ask a supplementary.
Robin Lunn, Worcester 433. Thank you for your answer. Do we know if the growth in services has led to a growth in attendances at these services?
I don't have that information, but I will find out.
And question 28, another supplementary.
26,
okay.
Yes. Are we seeing a growth in services on other days of the week apart from Sundays?
I'll have to repeat my previous answer.
Thank you. That was in response to a supplementary for question 26. And now to question 27. Yes, thank you.
Patrick Richmond, Norwich 180. Thank you for the very full answer. In view of saying it was good quality research, does the wider church give guidance then about rotating services in rural situations amongst various churches?
I declare an interest being a bishop in a rural diocese, and I would love to see some sort of guidance around this, or at least the guidance which reflects the fact that no one rural area is like any other rural area. And so I would take this away with an interest in trying to see what we can do in terms of just sharing good information, good experience, and recognise that it's not replicable in every single place, but it's helpful to understand the response.
Actually, we have a second supplementary over here. Thank you, Charles.
Caroline Herbert, Norwich 372. As a member of the Rural Affairs Group, I wondered if the Bishop was aware of the Fringe meeting on Monday lunchtime, which includes an opportunity to contribute ideas and experience to shape future research and resourcing to support rural churches.
Now.
Thank you, Caroline, for that reminder. That's it. 2 supplementaries for a question. So we're going to move on to the last one in this section, question 28. Yes, thank you, Andrew Atherstone.
Andrew Atherstone, Oxford 184. Thank you for the answer. Surprised to hear there are no plans given the excellent debate on these links in the February Synod. I wonder if the Archbishop can lead us by example by putting Brazil on your itinerary next time you're in the Americas as part of our desire to promote global Christian unity.
I think that's a question on my own activities and plans, which I think is out of order.
Yes, that's fair enough. I agree with you, Archbishop Justin. So the next section, for the House of Bishops, we go from question 29 to 61. This is the largest section. Starting off then with question 29. Yes, thank you, Susie Leaf, to ask a supplementary.
Susie Leaf, Truro 421. I think I have to declare an interest. I was one of the 1,950 delegates from over 50 countries who attended GAFCON in Jerusalem. And if I may, I'm glad to say that those of you who missed it can catch up, as they say, and join the hundreds of thousands who made use of the recorded live stream of the events. Naturally, I'm disappointed by the initial answer that the House of Bishops have no plans to discuss the letter to the churches. And my question is simple. Why, when they knew that GAFCON was taking place, have no plans been made to discuss the outcome?
I'm grateful for the question. It doesn't really add much to, I think, the questions you'd asked already, and I think I'd want to echo the answer that I made earlier. We welcome very warmly all groups across the Anglican Communion that seek the flourishing of the life of the Communion. but we do not always discuss the different propositions that are made by them.
Yes, are you Andrew Bell? No, no, you're not. Oh, right. Okay, yes, for a supplementary. Sorry, I can see you now.
It's a good way to make an entrance, isn't it? Mark Lucas, Peterborough 193. I just wanted to ask on the answer on page 18 that the reference is made to maintaining good relationships with other churches. However, GAFCON is not another church. It's part of the Anglican Communion. It's the same church that we are here representing, and represents indeed far more of the Anglican Communion than we do. So it does seem to make a lot of sense to make more comment on it here at this group so that we know what's going on, those who are not there.
So what's your question?
Question
Please.
is, can we have an opportunity, I'm aware it's going to be difficult here, but maybe at the next Synod meeting for a presentation on what went on at GAFCON Jerusalem 2018. There are a number of us here that were there that would be very happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I rather suspect that's one for the Business Committee, not for me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Question 31? Yes, thank you.
Andrew Bell, Oxford 374. Thank you for your reply. As you agree that it's important to note and welcome events, how did the House of Bishops note and welcome GAFCON as the largest Anglican gathering in 50 years, or how will it so note and welcome?
Thank you very much indeed for your supplementary. There hasn't been a meeting of the House of Bishops since the GAFCON meeting, so the answer to that is it hasn't yet had an opportunity to do so. How will it do so? I can only quote Groucho Marx, I never make predictions, especially about the future.
Yes, John Freeman. Is this for question 31 now? Thank you.
Chester, thank you for calling me. Is the Archbishop aware that there are larger Anglican meetings in the world, in other parts of the world, where 4,000 people turn up for celebration when people are ordained as new brothers?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm aware of a very wide range of meetings and celebrations, many of which I often go to. But thank you.
Yes, Clive's going to ask a supplementary.
Go in London 358. I note that the Archbishop has commented that it's open to churches around the world to approach the Anglican Communion if they want to become provinces recognised by the Communion. I would like to ask whether that has happened, and if so, what the response has been.
I think technically that's a question about the Anglican Communion. I am not aware of it having happened.
Thank you.
Ever.
Simon Butler to ask a supplementary. Thank you.
I'm aware as a member of the Archbishop's Council that the Archbishop briefs the Council on Anglican Communion matters. Does he brief the House on Anglican Communion matters?
Thank you very much, Simon. I do indeed.
Thank you. We move on to question 32 because we've had all the supplementaries for the previous questions now.
Supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Vivian Goddard, to ask a supplementary.
Given that apart from Maidstone and Burnley, the two ones that Archbishop mentions, there are only 5 other serving bishops who do not ordain women, what does the House of Bishops intend to do about this apparent discrimination?
I was making my way to the platform, but I didn't hear the question.
Given that, apart from Maidstone and Burnley, to which you refer, there are only 5 other serving bishops who do not ordain women, what does the House of Bishops intend to do about this apparent discrimination?
It's outside the question, really. Thank you. Yes. Question 33. Question 34. Oh, yes. Mary Derlacher, to ask a supplementary. To your question 33. Thank you.
Sorry to make you come back, Archbishop, but Mary Derlacher, Chelmsford, 271. A bit like the persistent widow and that infuriating message on the tube, mind the gap. The gap never seems to get closed. And when it comes to repairing the selection of people of able people for high office, particularly for bishops and preferably diocesan bishops, it's woefully, is it not inadequate? How are you proposing to change the criteria, which is apparently so inimical to getting proper representation?
The Nomination Commission, bishops in their appointments, the deans on their appointments, they always actually adhere to the 5 guiding principles, where there's a hope for mutual flourishing, and the work which was done by Oliver Donovan is playing a major part, and the review by Sir Philip Moore has got groups that are working on that particular recommendations. And all I can say is that it's already invidious to think that people have got within their heads to be discriminatory. The processes, the way they work, may not produce the result that you want, but in terms of when either Canterbury or myself are chairing the Crown Nomination Commission, the 5 guiding principles are abided by the people that are coming, and they're asked questions. How then the result turns out is a matter which you could not second guess, hence the work by Professor Donovan and also Sir Philip Moore's report. And groups have now been set up to work at that particular work, and we're hoping that in non-distant future, change may appear.
Thank you for your answer.
Yes, Sue Boyes for a point of order. Thank you.
Chair, I very clearly heard you ask people to make their way to a microphone if they were planning to ask a supplementary. I'm not sure that everybody else heard you, and I wondered if you'd like to say it again.
Thank you, Sue. Your words will suffice. Thank you very much. Okay, so if everyone could remember that, please, that would be helpful for the smooth running. Question 34. Question 35. Yes, thank you. Josie Munro.
Joseph Munro, London 356. Thank you for your reply. I want you to ask, given these new appointments and that are identified in your reply, and for Synod to know what the progress of turning up the volume is, what is your current percentage of BME clergy with senior roles in the Church of England?
I don't have that precisely in my head, but what I can tell you is that the current percentage of BME clergy in senior roles, but on the back of these appointments, is pretty close to the percentage of clergy overall in the Church of England. That does not mean that we should not be going further. So it is fairly closely representative now of the overall proportion within the Church of England as a whole of all ordained persons. But I would not want us to be complacent about that, because we need to keep working away at it.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 36. Yes, thank you. Gavin Oldham to ask a supplementary.
Gavin Oldham, Oxford 378. If by marginalising structures which express solidarity with the disadvantaged, He is describing, for example, the child tax credit system, which benefits 1 in 6 of the poorest families in the United Kingdom. Is he aware that the government has found it necessary, as the Institute of Financial Studies puts it, to significantly reduce the income of low-income working-age households, particularly those with children, so that the universal health service can enjoy a further £20 billion each year, in contrast to higher taxpayers paying a mandatory individual insurance premium to cover the cost of their use of the health service?
The very specifics weren't at the top of my head, Gavin, but please be assured that we are involved deeply, regularly, in debates with government and government departments about every aspect of child benefits and child welfare, believing that we have to improve the system for the nation as a whole.
Question 37. Yes, thank you. Simon Butler to ask a supplementary.
219. Thank you for the answer, Bishop Tim. I wonder if you could give me some idea of what process you're going to take the college through so that they just don't repeat the inability to find a common mind that the House has clearly found so far.
Tim Thornton, 44, Bishops of the Forces, related to the Bishop of Lambeth. As the answer says, I think the college is going to meet not all together, but through the regional processes, and a group is looking to how we can put together sort of advice, but also people to give their opinions, if you like. So from people who feel very strongly about this, we're going to try and give all the regions as many resources as we can, so that they can discuss these in the regions with as many bishops as possible, so that when we come to the House in December, the debate is as informed as it can be when we're going to have to make a decision.
Question 38. Yes, thank you. Stephen Hogg to ask a supplementary.
Bradley Smith, Chichester 290. Since the answer confirms that the legal advice contained in the guidelines represents the Church's official position on the seal of the confessional, what will be done to ensure that conflicting advice, such as that recently offered by the Diocese of Canterbury, will be withdrawn, and when?
All I can say is that my answer to this question is a public answer which will be in the public domain and makes clear the Church of England's position as things stand.
Thank you. Question 39. Yes, Lindsay Newcombe to ask a supplementary. Thank you.
Lindsay Newcombe, London 357. So the written response to my question did not actually answer my question, and I think you have partially answered that question now about whether measures have been taken to reassure penitents that the law has not changed. However, this morning the Times raised this issue in a negative way, and the publicity around the Canterbury guidance has destabilised the certainty that people have in this ministry of the Church, which is so important and so freeing. Will steps be made now to make a more public statement on this?
As I've already said, my answer will be very public and is the clear view of the Church of England on the seal of the confessional in advance of any of the conversations and debates which will proceed as the Bishop of Lambeth has outlined. And that is the guarantee that we can issue at this stage.
Can I ask a supplementary for the other
question?
question?
No, Lindsay. Thank you. Thanks for understanding. Question 40. Yes, thank you. Jane Ozanne to ask a supplementary. Thank you.
Ozanne, Oxford 379. Thank you for your answer, Bishop Christine. Given that there are many LGBTI Anglicans in civil partnerships who have been refused communion and who've been told that their children cannot be baptised in various Anglican churches around the country, what is the proper process by which they should register their hurt and anger with the welcome that they've received?
The statements made in the pastoral statement from the House of Bishops 2005 state in slightly softer language the situation that actually is expressed very clearly in our canons. And if you look at the canons to do, particularly B15, B16 for communion, B22 for baptism, there is a very clear statement of what happens if someone is to be excluded from communion, which can only happen with the authority of the diocesan bishop. There is also a very clear statement about admission of infants for baptism. In both cases, it is to the diocesan bishop that recourse should be made.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. A supplementary question.
Angus Gowdy, Durham 298. As a method of assuring that this welcome will be made clear across the churches of the Church of England, will the House of Bishops commend the Lichfield letter of clergy as a model that could be used by other dioceses to encourage their churches to give a general welcome, as this is something that would not step beyond Church of England teaching or prejudge the areas of the teaching document?
I can't make promises on behalf of the House of Bishops, but we are certainly and have considered and commended the Lichfield letter in the Pastoral Advisory Group.
Question 41. Yes, Jane Ozanne to ask a supplementary. Thank you.
Thank you. Ozanne, Oxford 379. Bishop Christine, I'm afraid I'm confused. The House of Bishops hasn't taken a view, but I thought they'd taken a view in setting God's people free, that LGBTI members should be able to take a full role within their church rather than be disciplined, and that they shouldn't have to be transformed. We agreed in Synod last year that conversion therapy was wrong. So will the House of Bishops reaffirm their commitment to both the involvement of LGBTI lay members without discipline and the danger of conversion therapy, as the government itself has recognised this very week?
Jane, your question relates to the Evangelical Alliance. And if I have understood it correctly, and I'm sure I will be corrected very quickly if I haven't, the sections you quote are part of the teaching resource of the Evangelical Alliance. They are not, if I've understood it correctly, the two, the basis of faith and the evangelical relationships commitment that have to be made for a person or a church to join and be accepted as a member of the Evangelical Alliance. The Evangelical Alliance is an ecumenical movement, and there are many groupings, both ecumenical and more specifically Church of England, who have teaching resources that are not aligned with the guidelines from the House of Bishops. And so the existence of that, there is no, this is the Church of England, where we have a lot of opinions, and our opinions on sexual ethics are divided at the moment.
Question 42. Question 43. Question 44. Christina Barron to ask a supplementary.
Christina Barron, 245, Bath and Wells. Mr. Nye's letter to the Episcopal Church of the United States was sent in October 2017. Its existence became public knowledge in April 2018. Why the delay? Should not the House of Bishops have been informed more speedily?
My understanding, thank you for the question, my understanding is that the letter was not planned to be published, or we were waiting to hear when the letter would be published by the Episcopal Church. It was a letter to them. We were waiting for their decision to publish, and then at that point the House of Bishops would have been informed.
Christina, you can't ask us another supplementary. David Lamming. Thank you.
David Lamming, 399, St Edward's Beacon in Ipswich. Given that in your answer to the question, Bishop, you say that it was intended to inform the House of Bishops of the reply ahead of the Episcopal Church's planned publication of all the responses. Why could the content of the letter not have been discussed by the House of Bishops before it was sent?
It's difficult when these letters are requested, when responses are requested, because we do have to work within the time frame of the people who are asking the question. And as I've indicated, I was not directly involved in the composition of the letter or the process, but my understanding is that the time frame was pretty tight, and we needed to get, it was necessary to get a response back pretty quickly, and so that the time frame simply didn't allow that which you're asking for, regrettably.
Thank you.
Simon, about this other...
Which question? Because we've done two for question 44 now.
I was just asking a supplementary to them being taken together, as you've taken them together.
Right, okay
together,
then, Simon.
So. Is that okay?
Fine, thank you. I'll let you off.
I'm going to forget my question now. Simon, about this other 219, Bishop, what is the learning of the House from this experience?
That is a good question, and there's always something to learn. I think there might be a case for drawing more people into that consultation to which I refer, so that there are more voices who are able to contribute to it. I would stress, though, that these timeframes are often pretty tight. I mean, this was pretty tight for what was being asked, and I think the attempt to the consultation that was made was appropriate in those circumstances.
Question 45. There's a chance for one more. Christina, did you want? No. Let's move on. Christine sat down now. Christina. Okay, so question 46 then, please. Moving on to question 47. Question 48. Yes, thank you.
Peter Breckwell, Salisbury Diocese 210. Bishop, thank you very much for your answer. What statements you refer to in your final paragraph, what statements were you referring to? And would you also have thought of including the General Synod motion that was passed in November 1987?
It does refer to statements, doesn't it? I think the statements that were particularly in mind were the pastoral guidance on same-sex marriage, and the 2005, was it, statement on civil partnerships by the House of Bishops. It does refer to statements.
Okay.
Thank you. Question 49. Question 50. Over the page to question 51. Question 52. Question 53. Yes, thank you. Patrick Richmond for a supplementary. Thank you.
Patrick Richmond, Norwich 180. Many thanks. I'm delighted that this handbook is out. Were the survivors groups consulted, and do they approve of this product?
There has been consultation. There is more consultation. That's why it's probably important to emphasise this is a prototype, and the intention is that eventually it will go to publication, and that we hope will be a definitive guidance for parishes and be useful in that regard. That will be made available online, but the intention is also to put it into hard copy for every parish. So there is further consultation to come, and I particularly, and I know others involved, would welcome contributions from anyone on Synod and also particularly those who either are themselves victims and survivors or those who are represented by their groups.
Question 54. Yes, thank you. James Lee to ask a supplementary.
James Lee, Guildford 318. Thank you for your answer. I asked my question on behalf of my sister-in-law, who's very concerned about this issue. I just wanted to say, what reassurance can you give her that there's not a loophole that would allow someone to serve as a member of a PCC with the safeguarding responsibilities that that brings, when a DBS check might bring something to light that would show their unsuitability for the role? So what reassurance could you give her?
I recognise that concern.
Actually, that's a comment on the law, so we'll leave it for the moment. Thank you. Question 55. Question 56. Yes, thank you.
Kat Aldred, Derby 295. In order to keep Synod better informed, what plans are there to share information that's collated by the National Safeguarding Team about the number of safeguarding cases in dioceses and the number of allegations being made against church officers, and when and how might that information be shared?
Thank you. I'm glad we've had questions and answers about this before, and once again apologies that my answers haven't been as accurate as I would have wished. I think we need to be very careful when we talk about cases, to recognise that the numbers that are being registered involve concerns or reports about possible allegations. So I want to be careful that when we've used the word cases in your question, we need to be clear that those are used in a specific way. In answer to your question, I'm delighted that the National Safeguarding Team have now got additional budgetary resources to do this. An associate has been appointed. It has been a concern to me and to many others that we just have not had the data, and the data has not been good enough, the data has not been analysed enough. I would hope that not only will it be analysed properly and monitored properly, but that actually I'll be able to bring back to Synod some statistical reassurances that this is now being looked at.
Thank you. Question 57. Question 58. Yes, David Lamming to ask a supplementary. Thank you.
David Lamming, 399, St Edmundsbury in Ipswich. Thank you, Bishop, for your answer. Have terms of reference been set both in relation to Mr Galloway and to Tim Bryden, and if so, when and by whom? And on the question of timescale, the National Safeguarding Team's press release on the 31st of January of this year said that Sussex Police have been informed about the fresh information and that the National Safeguarding Team would be working collaboratively with them. Given that Sussex Police concluded what they called a proportionate investigation before the end of March, and given that George Bell's frail 94-year-old niece is waiting anxiously for the outcome of the investigation, what is the reason for the prolonged delay, and will an early target date for the completion of the investigation now be set?
David, as ever, I think I recognised 3 questions in your question, so forgive me if I don't answer them entirely. With regard to the last question, there is a real concern for all those who are particularly troubled and concerned by these matters, but it is an operational matter. It relates to a particular case, and I'm not able to comment upon that. You asked a more general question, which is about process, to reassure that the terms of reference that have gone to Tim Bryden are being considered by him, and it is both right and courteous that he should have time to consider those terms of reference before they're made public. I am confident, I trust, in saying that when they have been finalised, that we will be able to make them public.
Yes, thank you.
Martin Sewell, Rochester 391. In answer to David, you write, consistent with Lord Carlisle's recommendations, the core group will not decide whether allegations are made out. Yet the Carlisle report actually says the complete opposite, and I quote, Recommendation 26, complaints are not considered to be proved until findings of fact have been made by the core group. And Recommendation 31, it is unavoidable that, in the case of posthumous allegations, the core group will be required to make findings of fact. I'm sure the fault is all mine, but can you undertake to provide me with a written explanation reconciling the apparent contradiction between what Carlisle is reported to say in the answer and what he actually wrote?
I've been asked just to pause for a moment before responding. I can't quite read the handwriting or decipher the answer.
I knew that was going to happen.
So cunning, this bishop, so cunning.
I'm glad that Paul is not my GP, because I wouldn't be able to make any sense of this. You asked for a written answer. I think, to be fair both to you and to Synod, I need to give you a written answer for that question. Thank you.
Question 59. Yes, David Lamming to ask a supplementary. Thank you.
David Lamming, 399 St Ed's and Ips. Have the principles referred to in your answer, Bishop, been applied in relation to the what we'll call Bell 2 investigation? And if so, can you confirm that Desmond Brown, Queen's Counsel, who has now been accepted as a representative of Bell's surviving niece, Barbara Whitley, that he has been given access to all the material, and I quote from the response in the NSSG responses, all the material and evidence which should include information on which the complainant relies, along with information that adversely affects the complainant's case, so that the representative can give a properly informed view to the decision-making body, who we understand in this case to be Timothy Bryden.
Rather like St Paul writing to the Ephesians, you managed to ask and write something which has neither comma nor punctuation, and it had so many clauses, subordinate clauses, that I'm afraid the thrust of your question eluded me. So I will do you both the courtesy of giving you a written reply, which actually I'm sure will be better able to satisfy your question.
Thank you.
Thank you for understanding. Yes, Simon Butler for point of order.
Given these matters are of public concern, I think would the Bishop content to publish those questions so that all members of Synod can have their answers? Thank you.
Yes, I'm sure they'll be posted in the foyer downstairs. Question 60. Yes, thank you.
Isabel Adcock, 269 Chelmsford. Now that the whole of Synod has been made aware of this matter, ought not all formal recommendations concerning the issue and the associate proposals for their implementation be made available to members as the new draft guidance into safeguarding makes a requirement? And when will this be?
I've not yet read the Calabrian report personally. I've not yet seen the recommendations. The safeguarding group, I believe, on the agenda of next week, July the 12th, will see those for the first time. And at that point, my role is to make sure that we act upon any learning that comes through from those recommendations.
Thank you.
So that's the process and the timescale for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Question 61. Martin Sewell to ask a supplementary.
Yes, I do, yes. We're told that the release of the Singleton report was delayed because 2 dioceses had yet to report to the IST. Can you tell us whether the views of the IST were received and included in the report in the hours between 8:45 on the 22nd of July, when the journalist Donna Birrell asked Sir Roger Singleton about it, and 11:20 when the report went up online? Or was the report released in the form we have it now without it having been updated by anything from the IST? In other words, is this report updated or not? Is the trust?
I'm glad you asked me that question. I mean, I would like to say, and I hope Synod will be pleased to hear me say this, is that it was very much the hope of Sir Roger Singleton and others that the report would have come out about Easter. But because there was work still to be done, because it was only at a draft stage, which is what was emphasised in my answer at that stage, there was more work to be done. And it's a recognition that these are quite long and complicated and important processes that mean that those particular timescales need to be considered before I more publicly answer your question.
So we don't know.
I'm sure further conversation will take place. Okay. There's one question for the House of Clergy. Question 62. Yes, thank you.
Julian Hollywell, Derby 102. Thank you for your answer, Simon. You indicate in it that the ordinal and the guidelines on professional conduct are giving the framework to the discussion of the working group. Can you give some assurance that not only those on a bishop's licence, but clergy families in the widest possible sense and their well-being are also party to your research?
Our conversation about clergy has definitely included clergy families so far. We're using the guidelines in the ordinal to try and match up our work with existing work so that there can be some joined-up thinking around both professional standards and, at the same time, obligations to the clergy that they have to themselves and that parishes and dioceses and bishops have as well. So, yes.
Thank you. And Anne Foreman to ask a supplementary.
Thank you. Anne Foreman, Exeter 308. I welcome the possibility of more consultation, but I wonder if the working group would consider widening the planned engagement that you intend with the House of Clergy to include the Synod as a whole. I'm sure that we're all concerned with the well-being of clergy, but there are laity in particular who participate in ministerial development reviews, which are also based on the framework of the ordinal.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy to take that back to the group. I think we wanted to take it to the House of Clergy next February because the work originated in the House. Having said that, we are proposing to try and do a fairly broad and wide consultation using some technology that might be available to us. I don't want to say too much about that because there are other parties involved with that. But it may be, if it's of help, for me to go back to the group and see if we can have a conversation with the House of Laity next February, if there were a meeting of the House. I'd absolutely be very pleased to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So questions 63 to 67 for the Secretary General. Question 63. And then 64. Yes, thank you. Judith Maltby to ask a supplementary.
Judith Maltby, University TEIs 452. Thank you very much for your answer, and I'm glad to hear that these documents are going to be restored to online access, not only for members of this body, but for the wider church. But I don't think you answered my question about what sort of consultation process was undertaken before removing the working papers of this body from online access.
I apologise if we didn't undertake as much consultation as we could have done. It was very important to update the Church of England website, which was really very old and rather rackety, and I hope members of Synod on the whole will agree that the new website is a great improvement. What we found was that there was no automatic upload system available for large amounts of documents. So temporarily we've had to focus and prioritise. We've put the emphasis, first of all, I have to say, on making the website suitable for ordinary church members, inquirers, and for it to be a missional tool. For those who are researchers and who need to look further back, we will be focusing on putting up 2001 to 2011, and then in time things that go earlier on.
Thank you. And then questions 65 and 66 will be taken. Sorry, 64 and 65 being taken together. So we've done 64, 65. Okay. Question 66. Yes, thank you. Stephen Linus to ask a supplement.
Stephen Linus, Bath and Wells, number 60. Thank you very much for your answer, but I must confess myself a little disappointed in that the answer you've given focuses entirely on this synod and what the business committee might do. It does seem to me that the invention of PCCs after World War I was a huge change in freeing up the Church of England to be what it could be. We are not the NHS. We can't have a 70th anniversary bash in Westminster Abbey. We are slightly more important than the Incorporated Church Building Society, which managed a 200th anniversary in St Paul's last week. Will those in control, and you're only one of them I appreciate, look at what wider ways there may be to encourage, particularly PCCs, who the Enabling Act is really all about, to be able to note their position and to celebrate a centenary which has made such a difference to the established church?
Thank you, Stephen. I'm sure that we could find ways of communicating, perhaps through the website that I was just asked about, to PCCs.
I was hoping you might write a book.
I'm saving that for later. To communicate to PCCs the important information that they have been going for 100 years. In some cases, they really feel like they have been going for 100 years. And we will try and find ways of doing that.
Yes, thank you. Tim to ask a supplementary. Tim Hind, thank you.
Tim Hind, Bath and Wells 247. Is the Secretary-General aware that the author of the question was delightfully put the Church of England through the millennial celebrations and therefore might be an adequate resource to help?
Thank you. Question 67. Yes, thank you.
Chris Gill, Lichfield, 336. Thank you for your reply. I think we would do well to remember that cost isn't always financial, and reading through the papers that came out after the judgment, it seems that there would have been, to my mind anyway, a considerable amount of stress involved in all of this, which is a significant cost. Also, again from the paperwork, a significant amount of contribution from staff time, which you haven't included in your figures. In other places we would have calculated an approximate amount of that cost. And of course there will have been costs outside the synod by the people involved. I wonder whether it might be possible for you to review the process and whether we ought to be allowing such appeals to take place at such regularity.
There are one or two things there. I've interpreted the question as being about financial cost. I don't think we could reasonably have sought to answer about what other personal costs or stresses might have been involved, although I can well imagine they may have been. As regards reviewing the process, I will talk to the legal office to see if there are any learnings to be had from the process of this particular appeal.
Thank you.
Yes, April Alexander to ask a supplementary.
April Alexander, Southwark, 410. Could I ask the General Secretary to confirm that this is the first time there has been an appeal of this sort and that we were all learning as we went through it?
You can ask, but I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question. But I will look to a learned friend who may be able to give you the answer later on.
Thank you. The next section focuses on questions for the National Society Council. That's questions 68 to 71. Starting with question 68. Yes, thank you. Tiffany Robinson to ask a supplementary.
Tiff Robinson, Edmonds Green, Ipswich 209. Thank you very much for your answer to my question. As part of calling on admissions authorities to accept letters of appointment as proof of residence ahead of children moving into the area, could a pro forma letter be written which could be used by clergy and others moving into tied accommodation to support their application to that end?
Well, thank you for your supplementary. it sounds like an interesting idea. I think that the DFE is sympathetic to clergy and other workers seen to be given priority in school entry, and this has been communicated to DDEs. I think that approaches with pro forma letters will be approached at a diocesan level where there's the appropriate links with the local education authority.
Thank you.
Peterborough involves 317.
Actually, and this young lady was waiting before you, actually, Peter, so I'm going to take her question. Thank you for understanding.
Thank you. Rhiannon Parsons, Leicester 332. Have any considerations been made as to when such actions made in your answer might be carried out, and if not, why not?
So you mean which actions in relation to the emissions code itself, or in relation to proceedings locally? I think that's for it's for individual dioceses with their established relationships with LEAs to establish protocols and to use the basis of that relationship to move forward. I don't think a national letter is going to make much difference, I'm afraid.
So we've had the 2 supplementaries for that question. Thank you. So moving on to question 69. Go on then, Peter.
316 Peterborough involves. I was going to mention the military families and how indeed they have the same predicament and they are allowed to go under the emissions code. But as far as church schools are concerned, and rural church schools, Guildford thrives on church schools. Is the Bishop aware that a number of these church schools are forming into major clusters with one head, they're sharing services, and this could be the basis of sort of having a mother school under the academies, like a secondary school, with a number of these church schools keeping the flag flying in their local areas?
Thank you for your question. I think that some of you will have seen Country File with the Bishop of Huddersfield last Sunday. We're raising the profile, of course, in everywhere we can, that such clusters to make rural schools resilient. We're making as much headway as we can with that, and we're planning a national symposium about the place of rural schools in the rural environment, and more will come to the Synod about that in future.
Thank you. Question 70. And then question 71. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Jonathan.
Jonathan Aldrin Ford, 207 St Edmunds, Ipswich. I realise this is a very sensitive area. What I say now is not meant to be in any way adversarial. But if I understand your question, there aren't any national guidelines. I do understand there cannot be, but do I urge you to please produce some, because, as your question and answer says, given its essential links would be extraordinary for such decisions to be taken in isolation. Therefore, national guidelines are needed because we need to avoid any sort of lottery postcode over how children and their families are treated from school to school.
Thank you. I quite understand the force of your observation. The thing is that the whole point about the report we've issued is that this is about guidance around protection against bullying and reminding schools, church schools, of their obligations, not least under the Equalities Act. But the point is that issuing national guidance, which would suggest any relation to doctrine or the practice of the Church of England, well, there may be some guidance, but I can't predict, but there will be some in the end, but that certainly couldn't happen until after the completion of the process, which gives us the teaching document.
Thank you. There are 2 questions for the Church Buildings Council. First of all, question 72. Is anyone joining us? Question 73. Is anyone? We've done that. Oh, have I missed a question? Okay. No, I didn't think I had. Thanks, Jonathan. Don't confuse me. Right, okay, so we're moving on to the... yes, question 73, as I've already said. Okay, right, let's move on to the questions for the Ministry Council then. Question 74. Yes, thank you.
Graham Caskey, Oxford 375. I'm sure everyone will welcome the estimated number of ordnance due to start this year, an increase of over 100 from 2016. In light of this, what specific plans do the Ministry Council have in place to ensure this upward and encouraging trend of those offering and being accepted for ordained Christian ministry continues in 2019 and beyond?
The whole process, the whole priority of a 50% increase is a major focus of the staff and the Council of Ministry Division, with quite a substantial amount of staff dedication and processes across dioceses trying to, or not trying, but successfully gleaning various good practices that have enabled this growth to happen, which is both in terms of staffing and resourcing in dioceses, but also practices in terms of vocation days and vocation programs and so forth. So that will continue and needs to continue with at least the same force that we're engaging at the moment in order to sustain the growth to reach that 50% target. I mean, I think we had a huge uplift last year, and we've got a good uplift this year, so we need to work hard to sustain that. Thank you for asking.
A supplementary.
Ian Paul 227, Southall and Nottingham. Yes, it's a very welcome increase. I wonder what the normal process of review is when a TEI, perhaps one that in the past was the largest training institution in the Church of England, suddenly ceases to train either ordained or lay candidates for licensed ministry without any obvious explanation.
Can you explain to me how that relates to this question?
It's about the provision of training places.
I think the question, if I got the right question about the number?
74, yeah.
Questions? Yes, question 74.
Because the expansion in training obviously is going to put a demand on TEI provision.
All right,
Is
you're asking a specific question about specific institutions.
It's a bit vaguely linked.
There's the whole process of engaging with the capacity of the TEI sector is one that's got, there are a number of elements to that. I hope we are not looking at a reduction in the number of places, and if you look at the way in which places are being used across the sector, both in terms of part-time provision and full-time provision, there remains capacity in that sector. There is a specific issue that you're raising, which I think I'm not going to walk into.
All right, let's leave it there then. So, question 75. Yes, Jenny Humphreys to ask a supplementary. Thank you.
Jenny Humphreys, Bath and Wells 248. Thank you for the answer. Has consideration been given to the effect this has on women candidates, and is there a policy to inform and prepare them for this eventuality?
I'm trying to work out what the eventuality is. Could you just...
That when they go forward to a bishop's advisory panel, one of their advisors may be someone who does not believe that they should be ordained.
Yes, I mean, what will be explained to them is that all of those who are selectors, whatever their disposition, have gone through training, which includes unconscious bias training, and they will also have been clear through that training that they are looking at objectively, as objectively as one can in these processes, to fulfil the criteria laid out for selection. So that assurance is given, and candidates have explained to them that this possibility may arise.
Thank you.
Question 76. Yes. First of all, Kate Aldred, please.
Kat Aldred, Derby 295. Thank you for the answer to the question. Given that the technical problem with the website still has not been corrected as of just earlier today, what's being done to rectify this and to correct the clear inference that the primary reason that issues in human sexuality is being referenced is to emphasize a celibacy requirement for gay and lesbian candidates and ordinands in particular?
I'll try and give us as straightforward an answer as I can. First of all, as I understand it, this is what because I anticipated what you were going to ask, and tried to work out the answer. There is at the moment a copyright question, apparently. This has not been up online on the previous website. And there's a conversation going on with Church House Publishing, who own the copyright for this document, to enable it to be put up fully online. It's not been fully online on the Church House website. The important thing is that we have been, for donkey's years, using the paper document. So DDOs use the paper document, the book, which you can buy from Church House Publishing, the paper document to give to all ordinands to read, so that they can affirm that they will live by those guidelines.
Yes, thank you. Another supplementary.
Rachel Mann, Manchester 172. Given the fact that possibly no one outside of the Church of England, and certainly no one under the age of 50, will have any idea what the term homophile means, would it be possible to have a definition of that term on the website?
I'm sure it could be. Let's see if we can get the document up. If we can't get it up, we need to take it all down.
Thank you. Question 77. Moving on over the page to question 78. Question 79. Thank you, Andrew. To ask a supplementary.
Andrew Atherstone, Oxford 184. What's the Ministry Council's strategy for keeping track of ordinands identified as potential theological educators to make sure that they're suitably trained and equipped for that role?
Those who receive funding as potential theological educators are obviously pursued through their training. They're followed through their training through the Ministry Division staff engagement. The question then is what happens. I mean, from my point, I'm just reflecting on this as somebody who ran an institution where we had a lot of people in that category. The question then is what happens. There are various groups, including the Young Theologians group, which is one mechanism by which that process is pursued. But I think there's probably a bit more that one could do. I think there's a question about our accountability in terms of this. I mean, it's a really important investment that we make, then supporting people through that, so to ensure that that investment is then well used is an important question for us to pursue. Thank you.
Question 80. Yes, thank you.
Nigel Bacon, Lincoln 341, and I declare an interest. I am a licensed reader. Bishop Martin, thank you very much for your answer. And in your answer, you note that the diversity between dioceses on lay ministry that exists today, and also the widening range of those ministries. In the work of Ministry Council, will you be drawing out of this some view as to what best practices are, recommendations for the future evolution of lay ministry in its various forms, and also will you be considering the extent, if any, to which there should be consistency between dioceses on matters such as licensing of lay ministry?
If I can answer the last part first. There have been two consultations on authorization, and a framework for authorization is being developed, which should be published for wider consideration in the autumn of this year, so presently. One of the things that the Ministry Council is engaging with at the moment is trying to work out what the breadth of its remit is. And because, as you indicate, our understanding of ministries has expanded and expanded and expanded. And the position I want us to get to is precisely the one you're describing, where we are, as it were, an enabler and encourager of a variety of forms of ministry, and particularly being able to enable dioceses to cross-fertilise, to learn from one another, and to share good practice. So that's the position I want us to get to. It may take us a little while, but hopefully not too long.
And then question 81.
Supplementary.
Yes, Nigel
Bacon, Lincoln 341, and as far as I know, still a licensed reader. No. Bishop Martin, will you join me in urging the Business Committee to make time at a group of sessions sometime next year for Synod to have a discussion on the development of licensed, authorised and accredited lay ministry?
We'll happily join you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we come to the back page, the last section. Questions. There are 2 questions for the Remuneration and Conditions of Service Committee. The penultimate question, question 82. Oh, and our very last question, question 83. Yes, please, thank you.
Paul Hutchinson, York 243. It may be difficult to quantify how many hours an office holder works, but most house of duty posts specify in their advertising